Welcome to the MB-920 Certification Preparation course, where we will methodically deconstruct the Dynamics 365 finance landscape to ensure your success. This introductory module establishes the foundational blueprint for understanding the functional components and structural requirements of the official examination environment. This is an unofficial, independently produced course. It is not affiliated with, endorsed by, or connected to Microsoft in any way. All trademarks belong to their respective owners. Additionally, this content is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Always consult a qualified professional before making financial or legal decisions. Choosing this course is a strategic investment in mastering the complexities of the Microsoft Dynamics 365 Finance Suite. You will gain a comprehensive understanding of the core capabilities, financial frameworks, and essential business processes that current industry leaders rely upon. By following this curriculum, you are setting yourself up to navigate the exam with absolute clarity and confidence. We have structured these lessons to prioritize technical precision and clarity, moving away from filler content to focus strictly on what you need to pass. We will begin by exploring the core capabilities of the platform, including the user interface, workspaces, and reporting utilities. From there, we move into the intricate details of the general ledger, focusing on accounts, dimensions, and the financial close process. As we progress, we will examine the full life cycle of procure-to-pay and order-to-cash cycles, which are the backbone of any enterprise resource planning implementation. You will also learn about asset and cash control, as well as the fundamental concepts of budgeting and supply chain management. This path is designed to be cumulative, ensuring that each topic builds upon the one before it to create a holistic view of the ecosystem. The MB-920 exam tests your knowledge of how these modules interact within a cloud infrastructure, so we emphasize the technical logic behind each configuration. You need to understand not just how a button works, but why that specific setting exists within the larger architectural context of the software. I suggest that you adopt a systematic mindset, viewing each process, like a journal entry or a vendor invoice, as a data transaction that influences the broader system. By maintaining this perspective throughout the course, you will find it significantly easier to answer the objective-based questions that the exam will present. Success is a matter of consistent preparation. See you in the next lesson. Welcome to our exploration of the Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations User Interface, where we begin our journey into standard navigation paradigms and workspace personalization. This chapter serves as your foundation for mastering the system's interface to ensure you can navigate complex enterprise environments with professional precision. To operate effectively within a platform as expansive as Dynamics 365, one must first internalize the fundamental mechanics of its navigation structure. The system is designed around a hierarchical model, where the main dashboard acts as a central hub from which all modular navigation originates. Users interact primarily with the navigation pane, which serves as a sidebar repository for modules, workspaces, and recent activities. Understanding that this navigation is contextual allows you to transition between functional areas like the general ledger or procurement modules without losing your operational focus. By leveraging the pinning functionality, you can ensure that the modules you utilize most frequently remain anchored for instant access, which is a common requirement for maintaining efficiency in high-pressure financial environments. Consistency in usage depends largely on how you manage your default company parameters, as the system needs to know which legal entity you are representing at any given moment to provide accurate transactional data. Personalization is not merely a cosmetic endeavor, but a critical strategy for managing the high cognitive load inherent in enterprise management systems. Dynamics 365 allows for deep customization of the user interface, including the ability to alter visual telemetry display themes to suit various accessibility or environmental needs. By configuring these themes, you reduce visual fatigue, which directly correlates to fewer errors during intensive data entry or reporting tasks. Furthermore, the capacity to modify the dashboard layout means you can remove noise and prioritize the components that feed your specific operational dashboard. When you personalize these elements, you are effectively creating a bespoke control panel that mirrors your unique daily responsibilities within the organization. This level of granular control is what separates an average user from a power user who can synthesize information rapidly across disparate system segments. We must also address the control elements and grid filtering mechanisms that represent the primary interaction points for transactional data management. Modern web-based ERP interfaces often rely on flexible grid structures that allow for advanced sorting, filtering, and grouping, mirroring the utility of complex spreadsheet software. Mastering the filter pane enables you to construct dynamic queries that narrow down thousands of records to the specific subset required for a current task, significantly reducing search friction. Within these grids, individual control elements facilitate data input, providing validation feedback as you work, which ensures the integrity of your financial inputs before they are posted to the ledger. Should you find yourself dealing with high volumes of data, utilizing keyboard shortcuts is a professional necessity that bypasses the repetitive strain of mouse navigation. These shortcuts are hard-coded into the platform to allow for rapid navigation, field jumping, and menu triggering that keeps your hands on the keyboard and your focus on the data. Managing multiple open browser tabs within the platform is an essential skill for professionals handling cross-functional workflows. The underlying architecture of the ERP allows for session persistence across multiple tabs, provided you understand how the system manages legal entities and security context per session. For instance, you might maintain one tab for journal entry verification while using another to review vendor account history, thereby enabling a comparative analysis that would otherwise require cumbersome back-and-forth navigation. Care must be taken, however, to ensure that settings, such as the default company, are explicitly managed so that you do not inadvertently manipulate data in an incorrect legal entity. By developing a structured approach to your browser session management, you gain the ability to perform complex transactional workloads with a greater degree of parallelism and fluidity. This mastery of the interface ultimately translates into a robust, reliable user experience capable of supporting the most demanding enterprise reporting and administrative requirements. Until next time, keep identifying the patterns that govern how we interact with these large-scale systems. Welcome back to our journey through the Dynamics 365 finance ecosystem, where today we focus on the architecture and functional utility of shared workspaces. This chapter is designed to transition your understanding from basic navigation to the sophisticated, role-based orchestration of operational tasks. In the modern enterprise resource planning landscape, the concept of a workspace represents a fundamental shift away from traditional, siloed menu structures. Rather than forcing a user to navigate through distinct, disconnected forms to retrieve data or perform a single task, workspaces aggregate information into a cohesive, action-oriented hub. Think of a workspace as a customized cockpit where all primary operational metrics, pending business transactions, and relevant analytical charts reside in one logical space. This design philosophy reduces cognitive load by presenting the most critical data points up front, allowing for an immediate assessment of business health or immediate response to operational needs. When you interact with a workspace, you are effectively engaging with a curated view of the system that anticipates your role-specific requirements. This consolidation is not merely a cosmetic improvement, but a strategic enhancement to daily productivity, as it minimizes the need to traverse multiple hierarchy levels within the application. By centralizing the data, Dynamics 365 enables users to focus on decision-making rather than data retrieval. The configuration process of these workspaces is remarkably flexible, catering to both standard administrative defaults and individual user preferences. At the core, you will find tiles, which are interactive elements that display aggregate numbers, such as the count of invoices awaiting approval or purchase orders currently in a delayed state. These tiles serve as gateways. Clicking on one directs the user immediately into a filtered list of the underlying source records. Beyond tiles, workspaces often feature lists that present time-sensitive data, effectively turning the interface into a queue management tool. A user can personalize these workspaces by pinning specific reports, embedding Power BI visualizations, or adding custom application links that frequently used processes require. Once you grasp how to modify these views through the standard personalization engine, you unlock the ability to tailor the system to fit specific business workflows without needing custom code deployments. This modularity ensures that the interface remains scalable and adaptable as roles evolve or business processes change within the organization. Understanding the progression from summary to granular detail is essential for mastering the transactional flow within Dynamics 365. When a user observes a KPI presented on a workspace tile, they are viewing a calculated abstraction of complex datasets. By design, the system maintains a direct, actionable link between this summary and the primary source documents, such as a specific vendor invoice or a sales order header. This drill-down capability is a cornerstone of the user experience, as it ensures that any outlier identified in the summary can be investigated by a single click. For instance, if an accounts payable clerk notices an unusual spike in the pending payment queue, they can drill into that tile to review individual records, identify the cause, and rectify the issue without leaving their primary workspace context. This continuity between analytical insight and transactional execution is precisely what streamlines routine tasks and increases the velocity of business operations. By mastering these interactions, you ensure the system serves as a catalyst for efficiency rather than an impediment to daily productivity. I look forward to our next session. Welcome back to our exploration of core platform capabilities, where today we focus on mastering the global search feature in Dynamics 365 Finance. This tool is essential for navigating the immense complexity of modern ERP environments efficiently. The global search functionality acts as your primary interface for interacting with the underlying indexing architecture of the platform. By design, Dynamics 365 maintains a sophisticated background index that maps menu items, system pages, and granular transaction data to searchable text tokens. When you enter a command into the top navigation bar, the system does not simply browse the current module. It performs a cross-system query against these indexed artifacts to return relevant results. This capability is fundamental because it decouples your navigation from the rigid hierarchical structure of the menu system, allowing you to jump directly to specific forms like vendor master or ledger entries without traversing endless submenus. Understanding this index-based retrieval is critical not just for daily operational speed, but for maintaining productivity during intensive auditing tasks where quick access to specific records becomes a bottleneck. To leverage this effectively, you must understand how to employ logical operators and advanced syntax within your search queries. The engine supports specific wildcards that allow you to narrow down results when you do not have the complete string to hand. For instance, using an asterisk as a truncation character allows the search to return all objects matching a partial prefix, which is particularly useful when querying master data entries where naming conventions might be loose or inconsistent. You should treat the search bar as a programmatic interface. The more specific you are with your syntax, the more efficiently the system prunes the non-relevant results from the final output list. This is particularly relevant when navigating complex multi-module setups where the search scope is broad enough to return thousands of potentially irrelevant navigation items unless you constrain the search by entity type. One of the more powerful and often underutilized features is the ability to save refined search queries for routine future retrieval. In many finance-heavy roles, you find yourself performing the same lookups across multiple legal entities or functional modules throughout the workweek. By refining your search criteria, perhaps by combining specific status codes or transaction types, and bookmarking the result page, you effectively create a personalized navigational shortcut that circumvents the standard UI flow entirely. Furthermore, by analyzing how global search indexing reduces navigational overhead, you can begin to restructure your personal workflow to depend more on high-level queries rather than manual pathing. This approach transforms the ERP from a collection of silos into a cohesive data environment where the information you need is always a single command away, regardless of where that data resides within the technical architecture. When dealing with hidden system pages or specialized administrative forms, global search is often your only reliable gateway, as these items are frequently excluded from the standard user-facing menus to prevent accidental configuration changes. The indexing mechanism indexes these functional pages exactly as it does transaction records, meaning that if you know the internal nomenclature of a specific administration tool, you can simply type its name to gain immediate access. This is vital for administrators who need to manage ledger configurations or tax parameters without toggling through various setup modules. By consistently utilizing these features, you minimize the friction between your intent, the need to solve a financial problem, and the execution within the software, which is the hallmark of a high-performance ERP user. As you gain more experience, you will naturally gravitate toward using the search bar as your primary driver for all movement within the system, treating menu navigation as a secondary fallback mechanism. I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome to this deep dive into the native reporting utilities within Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. We will examine how to leverage the built-in operational reporting tools to extract actionable data without external dependencies. When we interact with complex enterprise systems, the friction between needing data today and waiting for IT to develop a custom report is often a primary source of inefficiency. The platform architecture provides a robust suite of operational reporting capabilities that reside directly within the user interface, effectively democratizing access to business intelligence. By mastering the grid-based filtering, advanced grouping, and data inquiry views, you eliminate the necessity for secondary tools when responding to urgent management requests. These utilities are not merely secondary features, but fundamental components of the system designed to empower power users and functional analysts alike. You will find that these inquiries often provide the exact level of granularity required for daily decision-making processes. Understanding the native capability to manipulate record sets in memory allows you to maintain focus on the business context rather than the technical implementation. The beauty of this approach is that it remains consistent across the entire finance and retail footprint of the application. By avoiding the overhead of external reporting layers, you ensure that your data remains aligned with the transactional integrity of the core system. The integration with Microsoft Excel serves as a centerpiece for agile data manipulation across the platform. You can export almost any live data matrix directly from the application grid, which opens up sophisticated analysis possibilities for users who are already familiar with the spreadsheet environment. This is not a static data dump. The system often maintains a link via the Office Integration Framework, allowing for streamlined updates if properly configured. When you export these views, you are pulling the active record set, meaning any filters or advanced queries you have applied within the form are preserved in your resulting spreadsheet. This functionality is particularly useful for financial reconciliation tasks or when you need to perform quick pivot-based aggregations that are not explicitly defined in the standard report library. Since these exports are handled through secure, authenticated service calls, the data remains subject to the same row-level security constraints applied within the application itself. It bridges the gap between structured enterprise databases and the flexible, high-speed requirements of day-to-day administrative operations. Beyond simple data exports, the print management framework offers a sophisticated method for handling document output across the supply chain and financial cycles. Document instances such as purchase orders, customer invoices, or statements must be routed to appropriate destinations based on business requirements. You configure these destinations directly within the system settings, where you can select between screen, printer, file, email, or a specified network share. The flexibility of this framework ensures that a large organization can automate its communication flow, directing documents to specific email recipients or archiving them to secure cloud storage automatically. Furthermore, you do not need to trigger these processes manually if the volume is consistent. The system allows you to schedule these document generation tasks through batch processing. By utilizing the batch framework, you offload the processing of complex or high-volume report generation to background threads, which prevents the user interface from locking up during execution. This decoupling of presentation and input is a hallmark of a mature enterprise platform designed to maximize hardware resource utilization efficiently. See you in the next session. Welcome back. In this lesson, we will explore the shared architecture and administrative frameworks that unify the various Dynamics 365 finance and operations applications. To understand the core of Dynamics 365, one must first appreciate that it is not merely a collection of isolated modules, but a tightly integrated ecosystem built upon a shared underlying architecture. This shared foundation relies on a common data model, which ensures that entities such as customers, vendors, and products can exist and be referenced consistently across different functional areas. The global address book represents an essential component of this architecture, serving as a centralized repository for contact information that applies to all legal entities within the system. Instead of duplicating data for every subsidiary, you maintain a single source of truth for individuals and organizations, mapping them to specific roles like vendors or customers as needed. This approach significantly reduces data redundancy while maintaining the integrity required for enterprise-level reporting and financial accuracy. By abstracting these common entities, the platform allows for a more cohesive flow of information between finance, supply chain, and commerce functions without requiring custom data synchronization logic. Legal entity frameworks form the logical boundaries for data isolation and financial reporting, which is a structural necessity for modern mid to large-scale organizations. You define a legal entity as an organization that has a registered or legalized business structure, which is mandated by law to maintain its own financial records for statutory reporting. This structure dictates how transactions are posted and how financial statements are generated, because each legal entity requires its own balance sheet and profit and loss statement. Furthermore, cross-company data sharing policies allow organizations to synchronize specific, non-financial configuration data across these entities when operational consistency is required. However, such sharing must be implemented with prudence to avoid compromising the legal autonomy that those entities were established to maintain. When you configure organizational hierarchies, you are essentially defining the reporting lines and operational boundaries that allow for roll-up reporting across the entire corporate structure, thereby providing a clear view of performance at both the local and group levels. The security model in Dynamics 365 is role-based, ensuring that users interact only with the data and interface elements necessary for their specific business functions. This architecture relies on a hierarchy where duties and privileges are assigned to security roles, and these roles are then mapped to users within the environment. When a user logs in, the platform reconciles their assigned roles against the underlying metadata to determine which menus, buttons, and fields are visible or editable. This granular control is vital for maintaining compliance under the segregation of duties principle, which prohibits a single user from controlling an entire business process, such as creating a vendor and simultaneously authorizing a payment. By managing security through these formal, abstract roles, rather than attempting to hard-code permissions per user, the system achieves a level of maintainability that is rare in monolithic legacy software. Governance of these environments is further supported by Lifecycle Services, which provides the deployment and management portal necessary to maintain systemic integrity throughout the software lifecycle. Lifecycle Services acts as the orchestration layer for the entire application environment, providing unified tools for deployment, patching, and diagnostic monitoring. This platform ensures that your administrative actions occur in a repeatable and documented way, which is crucial for passing audits and meeting internal compliance standards. It allows administrators to track the state of their instances, manage release cycles, and even troubleshoot performance issues using specialized diagnostic agents. When we consider the intersection of administrative governance and user access, we see how the platform provides a holistic view of the system's health. You are not just managing bits and bytes, but ensuring that the enterprise ecosystem remains aligned with the business goals of the organization. Understanding these shared administrative utilities is fundamental to managing a functional and secure finance system, as these tools create the boundary conditions within which all downstream financial processes must reside. See you in the next lecture. Welcome to the chapter on integration scenarios and frameworks, where we examine the architectural bridges that connect your Dynamics 365 environment to the broader Microsoft ecosystem. Mastering these connections is essential for any professional seeking to pass the MB-920 certification and demonstrate proficiency in enterprise data interoperability. In the modern enterprise, no system functions as an island, and the native integration capabilities of Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations apps are designed to ensure seamless data flow across the Microsoft stack. We look specifically at how these applications interface with Microsoft 365, Azure services, and the Power Platform to extend business functionality beyond the standard user interface. One of the most practical tools for rapid data management is the Microsoft Excel Data Connector, which allows for bulk editing of records directly within a familiar spreadsheet interface. By leveraging the OData protocol, the system maps entities to Excel tables, enabling users to push updates back into the application after making modifications. This mechanism validates all business rules and security policies during the import process, ensuring that data integrity remains intact even when handled outside the core platform. It is a powerful utility for mass updates, though it must be used with an awareness of the underlying entity structures that govern such transactions. When we pivot to process automation, Power Automate serves as the primary engine for handling complex cross-application workflows, such as transactional approvals. Instead of requiring a user to manually monitor a dashboard for pending ledger adjustments or new vendor requests, you can construct cloud flows that trigger notifications or approval prompts in Microsoft Teams or Outlook. This creates a bridge between the transactional state of Dynamics 365 and the human-centric decision-making processes held in external productivity suites. Integrating these flows requires a clear understanding of the OData actions available within the Dynamics 365 connector, which allow the automation platform to read, update, or create records based on specific business conditions. Because these flows execute in the cloud, they provide a scalable approach to asynchronous operations, ensuring that your enterprise processes are both responsive and compliant with established audit trails. Dataverse plays a central role in unifying these environments by providing a common data model shared across various Power Platform applications and Dynamics 365 instances. By utilizing shared Dataverse tables, organizations can effectively synchronize data between finance and operations apps and other solutions, reducing the reliance on custom point-to-point integration code. From an architectural perspective, this relies on the dual write framework, a feature that enables real-time, bidirectional data synchronization between the finance and operations environment and Dataverse. When a record is updated in one system, the dual write infrastructure ensures the corresponding record is updated automatically in the other, which is crucial for maintaining a single version of the truth. This is not merely about moving data, but about ensuring semantic consistency, where the same business entity, such as a customer or an order, maintains its state across multiple heterogeneous platforms within your enterprise landscape. Security is an unavoidable dimension of these integration frameworks, necessitating a rigorous approach to how information crosses private and public software boundaries. All integrations involving Dynamics 365 must adhere to the platform's security rules, ensuring that integrated services like Power Automate or external data connectors operate under the same permission sets as a human user. This means that if a service account lacks the required privileges to modify a specific ledger entity, any integration attempt will be rejected or limited by the system's native security stack. Understanding this perimeter is a fundamental requirement for the MB-920 exam, as it highlights how the system protects financial data even when exposed to automated or external processes. As you prepare, focus on the distinction between synchronous and asynchronous integration patterns, as this choice directly influences both performance and user experience within the integrated workflow. I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome to the General Ledger Framework, where we will explore the architecture of the chart of accounts. This chapter provides the essential foundation for data consistency across all your financial operations in Dynamics 365 Finance. In this chapter, we will master the technical configuration of the chart of accounts to ensure your financial reporting remains accurate and scalable. By the end of this section, you will understand how to design robust account structures that satisfy both corporate consolidation needs and local regulatory requirements. Building a solid chart of accounts is the most critical step in minimizing downstream errors during the financial period close. If you want to master the MB-920 certification, you must treat this structure as the backbone of every transaction within the system. The chart of accounts acts as the unified repository for all financial transactions. When you define a main account, you are establishing the primary destination for transactional data, which dictates how the system categorizes economic events. Within the Dynamics 365 finance architecture, this is not merely a flat list of numbers. You must organize these accounts into categories that facilitate logical reporting and an analysis. Each main account requires a classification that determines its behavior, such as whether it functions as a balance sheet item or a profit and loss component. This design choice ripple effects across your entire financial ecosystem. making configuration choices early on highly consequential for your reporting accuracy. Assigning an account type is perhaps the most significant functional decision you make for each ledger record. By designating an account as an asset, liability, revenue, or expense, you embed specific logic into the system that governs how balances are handled during period-end processes. For instance, balance sheet accounts retain their balances across fiscal years, whereas revenue and expense accounts are zeroed out into retained earnings. You must also consider the implementation of strict balance sheet validation rules. These rules prevent users from posting entries that would break the fundamental accounting equation, thereby ensuring that ledger integrity is maintained at the point of data entry rather than through laborious reconciliation processes later. Managing a global enterprise often requires that you share account templates across multiple legal entities. Dynamics 365 allows you to define a shared chart of accounts, which simplifies the maintenance burden when you operate across various geographical regions. When you utilize a shared structure, you must carefully configure localization settings to account for specific statutory requirements that may differ from your corporate or global standards. This hierarchical approach allows the organization to maintain a unified view for consolidation while providing sufficient flexibility for local entities to operate under their domestic tax and accounting protocols. Without this level of coordination, performing global consolidations becomes an exercise in mapping disparate data sets, which is inherently prone to error. Consistency is the final key to a well-structured chart of accounts. By standardizing your naming conventions and account numbering, you create a system that is intuitive for your end users and transparent for your audit team. It is often wise to build some buffer space into your account numbering scheme, allowing for future expansion as your business grows through acquisitions or new product lines. Remember that once a chart of accounts is active, changing its structure can be complex, so invest the necessary time in planning the taxonomy before entering production data. These technical choices are not just administrative tasks. They are strategic decisions that dictate the reliability of your enterprise financial intelligence. I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this lesson, we explore how financial dimensions act as the connective tissue for granular reporting without overwhelming your core accounting structure. When we approach the design of a general ledger, we often face a tension between the need for detailed reporting and the desire to keep the chart of accounts manageable. If we create a unique general ledger account for every department, cost center, and geographic region, the account list becomes unworkable and prone to human error during data entry. Financial dimensions solve this by separating the nature of the transaction from the context of the transaction. You define your main accounts as the primary classification, while dimensions serve as secondary attributes that attach to these transactions. By offloading these details to dimensions, we maintain a clean and streamlined chart of accounts while capturing the specific data points required for sophisticated financial analysis. To implement this, you must first define the financial dimensions as distinct entities within the system. You might establish a dimension for a department, ensuring that every expense can be tagged to the specific group that incurred it. Once defined, these dimensions are grouped into account structures, which act as the governing rules for how combinations of accounts and dimensions are allowed to behave. Within an account structure, you specify a sequence of segments, such as an account segment, followed by a business unit segment, and a cost center segment. You can further refine this by applying constraints, such as ensuring that specific cost centers are only available when a certain business unit is selected, thereby preventing erroneous data entry at the source. These definitions rely heavily on the concept of advanced rules, which provide the flexibility to override or extend account structures for specific business scenarios. For instance, if a particular project requires a different set of dimensions than your standard operating expenses, an advanced rule allows you to layer those requirements on top of the base structure without building a redundant primary ledger. This modularity ensures that the system remains responsive to the unique demands of different business units or project types. As you configure these, the system begins to enforce these rules during the journal entry process, providing immediate feedback to the user if a dimension combination is invalid according to the predefined structure. This proactive validation is critical for maintaining data integrity before the ledger ever touches a closed fiscal period. Beyond the general ledger journals, These dimension values propagate through the entire ecosystem of the Dynamics 365 finance architecture. When an operational transaction occurs in a subledger, such as a procurement process for vendor invoices or a sales transaction, the dimensions tied to those entries flow through to the ledger automatically. The system tracks these values systematically, allowing you to slice and dice your financial results based on any combination of these attributes. A controller can review an income statement by simply filtering on a specific region dimension, or an operations manager can assess a cost center's performance without needing to perform manual data reconciliation outside of the ERP. This capability transforms the financial ledger from a static record-keeping tool into a dynamic engine for strategic decision support. It is vital to recognize that while you can create many dimensions, they should be chosen carefully based on the reporting requirements of the organization. Each active dimension increases the complexity of the ledger and the maintenance effort required by the accounting team. You should avoid creating segments that do not add clear value to your management reporting or compliance needs. The strength of the financial dimension model lies in its ability to adapt over time, but excessive segmentation can lead to fragmentation in the ledger, making it harder to generate a coherent high-level view of the company's health. Striking the balance between granular utility and structural simplicity is the mark of a well-architected financial implementation. As you prepare for the MB-920 exam, keep in mind that the system places a heavy emphasis on these automated validation rules. You will likely be tested on your understanding of how account structures enforce entry discipline and how dimensions ensure consistency across both subledgers and the general ledger. Focus on the distinction between the chart of accounts as a static list of definitions and financial dimensions as the dynamic attributes that define the context of business operations. Understanding this modular approach allows you to articulate how Dynamics 365 manages complexity without sacrificing the integrity of the underlying accounting standards. With this grasp of dimension-based reporting, you are well equipped to handle the configuration requirements discussed in the next module. I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome back. We are now delving into the core of how financial data enters the system through journal entries and the mechanics of posting within the general ledger. In Dynamics 365 Finance, the general journal serves as the primary mechanism for manual accounting adjustments and transactional entries that do not originate from subledgers like accounts payable or receivable. To manage these transactions effectively, you must first define journal names, which act as templates controlling the behavior of the entry process. These names determine critical properties, such as the voucher numbering sequence, which ensures each financial transaction has a unique, traceable identifier. By configuring these sequences correctly, an organization maintains an audit trail that is both predictable and compliant with internal accounting controls. Furthermore, journal names can be configured to enforce specific validation rules, preventing users from posting entries that do not meet predefined criteria. When a user creates a new journal, selecting the appropriate name automatically applies these inherited settings, thereby reducing manual configuration effort and human error. Financial dimensions are fundamental to how an organization tracks performance across different segments of its business, and they play a pivotal role during the journal entry process. As you input lines into a general journal, the system allows for the definition of default financial dimensions, which can be configured at the main account level or the journal level. This feature ensures that every transaction is tagged with the necessary metadata, such as cost center, department, or project code, without requiring the user to manually enter these values repeatedly. When you establish these defaults, the system intelligently pre-populates these fields, improving data integrity and ensuring that financial reports remain consistent. If an override is required for a specific transaction, the system permits manual adjustment on the line, provided the user has the appropriate security permissions. This balance between automation and flexibility is essential for maintaining accurate reporting metrics that reflect the true financial position of the individual segments within your enterprise. Once a journal entry is prepared, it is crucial to subject it to a validation and approval process before it affects the balance sheet or income statement. Dynamics 365 Finance offers automated workflow capabilities that route journals to authorized personnel for review based on predefined conditions like transaction amounts or account types. This implementation of automated approval workflows acts as a control gate, ensuring that no unauthorized or erroneous entries impact the ledger. Before final commitment, the system allows you to perform a ledger posting simulation, which verifies that the entry balances according to the debits and credits required by the accounting setup. This simulation provides immediate feedback on potential errors, such as missing dimensions or inactive accounts, allowing for correction before the data becomes immutable. If an entry is inadvertently posted despite errors, the system provides a robust reversal functionality that generates the necessary adjusting entries to nullify the effect on the ledger while preserving a clear historical record. Managing recurring transactions is simplified through the use of periodic journals, which serve as a repository for adjustments that occur on a regular basis, such as monthly accruals or depreciation reallocations. By setting up these periodic journal templates, you can reduce the administrative burden of repeatedly recreating identical entries and minimize the risk of data entry mistakes during these routine tasks. When these journals are processed, they interact with the general ledger in the same manner as standard manual entries, contributing immediately to real-time financial reporting metrics. This real-time visibility is vital for management, as it allows stakeholders to see the impact of these adjustments on the company's financial health without waiting for the official period-ending processes to complete. Effectively utilizing these tools requires a disciplined approach to journal management, ensuring that every voucher is appropriately documented and that the data flowing into your reporting modules remains accurate and reflective of the current organizational status. I look forward to seeing you in the next lecture. Welcome. In this session, we investigate the mechanics of the financial period close process within Dynamics 365 Finance. We will examine how to maintain ledger integrity and ensure compliance during the transition between accounting cycles. The financial period close is not merely a collection of isolated tasks. It is a rigorous operational sequence designed to ensure the integrity of the general ledger. At the center of this process is the financial period close workspace, which provides a centralized view for monitoring progress across the organization. You should look at this workspace as your primary interface for delegating tasks, setting due dates, and tracking the status of individual closing activities. By structuring your close process within the application, you create an audit trail that documents exactly when specific reconciliations were performed and who acknowledged their completion. This structural rigor prevents the common pitfalls of spreadsheet-based tracking, where communication gaps often lead to missteps or incomplete reconciliations in the subledgers. One of the most critical aspects of this process is the management of ledger period statuses, which act as a gatekeeper for data entry. You have the ability to toggle periods between open, on hold, or permanently closed, and this setting can be applied globally or restricted to specific modules. For example, while the accounts payable team may need to finalize pending invoices, you might choose to lock the general ledger to prevent manual journal entries from further complicating the reconciliation. By systematically enforcing these locks, you effectively mitigate the risk of unauthorized backdated transactions that could skew your financial statements after the reporting period has officially ended. This discipline ensures that your balance sheet reflects exactly what was agreed upon at the cutoff point without the intrusion of late-arriving data. As we move toward the finalization of the period, we must address the volatility of foreign currency transactions through the revaluation process. When you operate in a global environment, market fluctuations between your accounting currency and transactional currencies necessitate a systematic adjustment of open balances. Dynamics 365 Finance handles this by revaluing open customer and vendor invoices as well as bank accounts to reflect current exchange rates at the end of the period. This calculation generates unrealized gain or loss entries, which are essential for presenting an accurate snapshot of your financial exposure. It is a precise task that requires careful validation, as these entries directly influence the current month's financial outcomes before the books are officially closed. Year-end closing represents the most significant event in the accounting calendar for Dynamics 365 Finance. This process involves the formal transfer of profit and loss balances into retained earnings main accounts, effectively resetting the income statement for the new fiscal year. The system executes this transfer based on the configuration of your main accounts, where you have previously defined which accounts are P&L versus balance sheet. You must be cognizant of the setup involving financial dimensions, as the system allows you to decide whether to retain these dimensions when transferring balances to the retained earnings ledger. This granularity is vital for reporting consistency, as improper configuration here can lead to a loss of detail regarding historical performance by department or cost center. Executing this sequence successfully requires a disciplined adherence to the predefined checklist within the application. I suggest that you view the financial period close workspace as a living document that captures procedural nuances unique to your business environment. By mapping your month-end closing steps to specific tasks in the system, you turn an opaque and stressful ordeal into a repeatable, automated administrative workflow. This reduction in cognitive load is exactly what allows professional accountants to focus on analysis and strategy rather than chasing down missing journal entries. Maintaining this level of operational hygiene is what separates a well-managed finance department from one prone to constant reactionary corrections during the audit phase. I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Welcome to the module on tax configuration, where we will examine how Dynamics 365 Finance handles complex international tax obligations through its native calculation engine. In this chapter, we will explore the structural components required to automate tax calculations and ensure regulatory compliance across multiple jurisdictions. Tax management in Dynamics 365 is not merely about applying a percentage to a transaction, but rather building a robust relational model that governs how the system interprets tax liability. At the base of this architecture lies the Sales Tax Authority, which represents the governmental body to which you report and pay taxes. These authorities are linked to settlement periods, which define the frequency, such as monthly or quarterly, at which you must finalize your accounts. You cannot effectively use the tax engine without first defining these jurisdictional boundaries, as they dictate the regulatory logic the system applies during document posting. By understanding the hierarchy from tax authorities down to individual tax codes, you create a system that calculates obligations dynamically without manual intervention. To make this engine functional, we must configure sales tax codes and item sales tax groups, which together determine the exact tax rate applied to a transaction. An item sales tax group acts as a label assigned to products or services, while a sales tax group is assigned to the customer or vendor. When you post a document, such as a sales order or vendor invoice, the system identifies the intersection of these two groups to select the appropriate sales tax code. This intersectional logic is essential because it allows the system to differentiate between various tax requirements based on the specific items being sold and the location of the counterparty. For example, a consulting service might be tax-exempt in one region, but subject to value-added tax in another, and this configuration layer handles that complexity seamlessly. Ledger posting groups then define the specific general ledger accounts where these calculated tax amounts are accrued, ensuring that your financial statements reflect accurate liability data. The power of this framework becomes truly evident during the periodic settlement process, where the system aggregates these liability entries into a single journal. When you run a sales tax settlement report, Dynamics 365 evaluates all posted transactions associated with a specific settlement period and prepares a summary of taxes collected versus taxes paid. This process is not just a reporting exercise, it is a critical step in clearing your outstanding liabilities. Upon processing the settlement journal, the system automatically marks the tax transactions as settled and moves the tax amounts from their temporary liability accounts into the final settlement account designated in your ledger. This ensures that your general ledger always maintains a clear distinction between active tax burdens and settled obligations. Furthermore, the system is designed to handle conditional tax scenarios, such as deferred taxes or taxes that only trigger upon physical payment, providing the flexibility needed for international compliance. Effective tax management ultimately relies on the precision of your foundational data, as even a small error in the setup of a tax authority or an item sales tax group can lead to skewed audit trails. Because these configurations are integrated directly into the document posting framework, the calculations happen in real time, providing immediate visibility into tax consequences during the procurement or sales process. This integration prevents the need for back-office reconciliations that often plague legacy accounting systems. If you find that your ledger postings do not align with your internal reporting expectations, the issue is almost always found in the mapping within the ledger posting group. Always remember that the system is deterministic. It will follow the rules you define, regardless of whether those rules match the current statutory requirements of the local jurisdiction. Regularly reviewing your posting groups and settlement period configurations is the only way to ensure that your financial automation remains aligned with changing tax laws. See you in the next lecture. Welcome to this exploration of intercompany accounting, where we will examine how Dynamics 365 Finance orchestrates financial transactions between distinct legal entities. In any enterprise operating across multiple legal entities within a single instance, the challenge of maintaining accurate intercompany balances often becomes a source of significant operational friction. Dynamics 365 Finance addresses this complexity through a robust framework designed to automate the recording of intercompany settlements. By defining specific posting relationships, the system effectively bridges the gap between individual ledger structures. When an accountant initiates a transaction in a source legal entity that involves a counterparty or a service provider residing in a different legal entity, the system intercepts this intent. It acts as an automated bookkeeper, ensuring that the appropriate due to and due from accounts are triggered in both systems simultaneously. This architectural design relies heavily on centralized configuration, where we specify permissible associations between entities. Without this groundwork, the reconciliation of cross-entity debts would remain a manual, error-prone endeavor that drains productivity and obscures true financial visibility at the corporate level. The mechanism starts by establishing an intercompany trade agreement that dictates how specific accounts should interact. We must configure the chart of accounts for each legal entity to include the necessary financial dimensions and the specific main accounts reserved for intercompany activity. You will observe that for an intercompany transaction to succeed, the system requires a mirrored configuration of setup parameters in the destination company. When a user posts a journal entry intended for another legal entity, the application performs a validation check against these predefined relationships. If the mapping is valid, the posting process creates a balancing voucher in the destination legal entity in the exact same moment. This atomic nature of the transaction ensures that the ledger remains in a state of consistent balance across the entire corporate structure at all times. It is a classic example of automated data integrity, where the system enforces business rules to prevent out-of-balance conditions. Centralized intercompany journal entries provide the most direct method to move value across the firm's legal perimeter. By utilizing these specialized journals, we can execute complex distributions that allocate expenses or revenues that technically originate in one entity but rightfully belong to another. During this process, the system automatically calculates the appropriate offsets and generates the corresponding ledger lines. This eliminates the need for the human user to manually calculate and post entries in the target entity. Consequently, the burden of data entry significantly decreases, and the risk of discrepancy between the books of separate legal entities is virtually eliminated. This functionality is not merely a convenience feature, it is a critical component for facilitating efficient global corporate consolidation. By fostering a seamless exchange of data, the platform provides a foundation for high-quality financial reporting that captures the full economic reality of the multinational group. Reconciliation processes, which often consume countless hours in a traditional accounting environment, are fundamentally altered by this approach. When we rely on the automated synchronization of vouchers, we move away from reactive reconciliation after the fact toward proactive data accuracy at the point of origin. The configuration involves mapping an intercompany vendor or customer account to a specific main account that represents the dues between the entities. From there, the posting engine handles the heavy lifting, ensuring that the ledger accounts reflect the true financial position of both participants involved. It is worth noting that while the system automates these entries, the underlying responsibility for defining the relationships remains firmly with the financial administrators. We are essentially modeling our intercompany business processes within the metadata of the platform itself. This allows for scalability, as adding new legal entities simply requires mapping them into this existing, tested architecture. When we observe these patterns in operation, the brilliance of the design becomes apparent. The system acts as a silent mediator, ensuring that if you debit an expense in one entity, a corresponding payable or receivable is correctly instantiated elsewhere. By minimizing manual intervention, we create a system where financial transparency is the default state rather than an elusive goal. It is important to approach these configurations with a focus on simplicity and standardization across the legal entity collection. If your naming conventions or account structures for intercompany dues vary too widely across entities, the complexity of the internal configuration will grow exponentially. Instead, standardized main account segments for intercompany activity provide a predictable, manageable pattern that stands the test of time. Understanding this ledger-centric logic is essential for anyone aiming to master the financial depth that Dynamics 365 Finance offers. I look forward to our next session together. Welcome to this module on vendor profile management within Dynamics 365 Finance. We will examine the core structural components and governance practices required to maintain accurate vendor master data. Effective vendor management begins with the understanding that every vendor in the system is anchored to the global address book. This architecture ensures that contact information, such as addresses and communication details, remains consistent across the entire enterprise regardless of the legal entity. By leveraging the global address book, you eliminate data silos and ensure that a change of address in one location propagates where visibility is permitted. When creating a vendor record, you must first associate the vendor with a specific legal entity, which then becomes the primary context for their financial interactions. This relationship creates a clear separation of duties and reporting while maintaining a single, unified view of the party across your corporate landscape. Properly managing these party records is the foundational step in mitigating risk and ensuring that your accounts payable documentation is audit-ready at all times. Vendor groups serve as the primary mechanism for categorizing suppliers to simplify daily operations and reporting. When you configure a vendor group, you are essentially establishing the default behavior for all vendors assigned to that classification. This includes defaulting ledger accounts for posting, which automates the entry of transactions into the general ledger without requiring manual intervention from the accounting team. Beyond posting profiles, these groups dictate settlement terms, transit times, and payment specifications that ensure consistency throughout the procurement lifecycle. By grouping vendors based on characteristics like geographic location or service type, you gain the ability to run granular reports and analyze spending trends with minimal effort. This systematic approach ensures that whenever a user selects a vendor on a document, the system automatically pulls these predefined characteristics, thereby reducing the likelihood of human error. Financial dimensions act as the lifeblood of robust corporate reporting in Dynamics 365 Finance. When you assign default financial dimensions to a vendor record, you are essentially tagging every future invoice and payment with the necessary metadata for cost center or department tracking. This means that if a specific vendor consistently supplies items for a particular department, the financial dimension reflects that association immediately upon the vendor selection in an invoice journal. Failing to set these defaults correctly often leads to significant cleanup work at the end of the month during the financial period close. By defining these at the vendor master level, you enable the system to stream this metadata seamlessly into purchasing documents like purchase orders and vendor invoices. This automation is precisely how you maximize data entry speed and ensure that the accounting team has the data they need to report by profit center without manual overhead. Payment terms and methods of payment are critical governance components that define the timing and mechanism of your financial outflows. Default payment terms at the vendor entity level inform the system when an invoice is due, directly influencing cash flow forecasting models. Meanwhile, the method of payment specifies whether you are settling an invoice via check, electronic bank transfer, or another financial instrument. These parameters are essential for maintaining accurate liquidity management, as they dictate which obligations manifest on your cash position report at any given point in time. Configuring these global defaults properly ensures that the accounts payable process remains standardized across the entire organization. Even when dealing with international vendors, these configurations provide enough flexibility to account for different currencies and bank formats while keeping the core logic intact for administrative consistency. Managing diverse delivery addresses is a common requirement in complex supply chain environments. Dynamics 365 Finance handles this through the address framework, which allows a single vendor account to have multiple shipping or service locations associated with it for different procurement scenarios. You must ensure that these addresses are current and properly categorized as primary or secondary for specific document types, such as purchase orders, to avoid shipment delays. Furthermore, the mandatory tax registration tracking must be configured for each vendor, particularly for organizations operating under multi-jurisdictional tax laws. This configuration ensures that the system validates the vendor's tax identification number before posting, protecting your entity from regulatory compliance issues related to tax reporting. By formalizing these governance rules, you create a robust ecosystem where vendor data is not just stored, but actively managed to drive operational efficiency. Goodbye for now. See you in the next session. Welcome back. In this session, we will examine the life cycle of a purchase order within Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management. The procurement lifecycle begins long before a physical purchase order is transmitted to a supplier. It often starts with a purchase requisition, which serves as an internal request for goods or services. Once approved, the system facilitates the transformation of these requests into formal purchase orders. This transition is not merely administrative, it is a structured process that ensures accountability and organizational oversight. By leveraging automated workflows, the system enforces procurement policies, ensuring that every request aligns with predefined business rules and budget constraints. This front-end governance prevents unauthorized spending and streamlines the communication between departments and the procurement team. When we construct a purchase order, we lean heavily on the product master data. Each line item on the order references these masters, which contain immutable facts about the items, such as their identifiers, descriptions, and inherent properties. From a technical perspective, the system performs unit of measure conversions automatically based on the configurations established in the Product Information Management module. If you procure items in pallets but inventory them in individual pieces, the underlying data model manages the conversion factors securely and predictably. This ensures that regardless of the ordering unit, the system maintains accurate stock levels in the warehouse. Pricing logic within the purchase order is another area where configuration dictates behavior. Dynamics 365 does not simply rely on static price lists, but instead integrates complex trade agreements that consider volume discounts, vendor-specific pricing, and effective date ranges. When a procurement agent adds a line item, the system evaluates all active agreements and applies the most favorable terms automatically. This automated resolution reduces human error and ensures that the financial commitment represented by the purchase order is accurate from the moment of inception. By decoupling price maintenance from the order creation process, organizations achieve a higher degree of consistency across their supply chain operations. Change management is a critical component of the procurement lifecycle that protects the integrity of the purchase order. Once an order is confirmed, it enters a state where core commercial terms, such as quantity and pricing, are effectively locked. If a supplier or an internal stakeholder requests a change, the system requires a formal revision process, which may trigger a reapproval workflow. This locking mechanism prevents discrepancies that could otherwise complicate downstream invoice matching and financial reconciliation. By enforcing a controlled change management cycle, the organization ensures that the purchase order remains a reliable source of truth throughout the procurement process. The act of confirming a purchase order has significant implications for both inventory and legal compliance. Confirmation triggers the generation of inventory transactions, which officially signal the expected arrival of goods. These transactions are visible to warehouse staff and influence demand-side planning calculations, effectively reserving the incoming capacity for specific needs. Furthermore, confirmation acts as the point where the commercial agreement is formalized between the buyer and the vendor. Once these terms are committed, the transaction is prepared for the arrival of the physical items, ensuring that the warehouse receiving events can be validated against an existing, authorized procurement record. By understanding this flow, you gain insight into how Dynamics 365 maintains data consistency across disparate functional areas. The integration between procurement, inventory, and finance is not an afterthought. It is built into the life cycle of every purchase order. As you navigate the application, consider how these steps work in concert to build a resilient and transparent supply chain. The automation of these workflows provides the necessary predictability for high-volume procurement environments. Through careful configuration of these lifecycle stages, an organization can achieve granular control over its expenditures and supply operations. I will see you in the next part of our series. Welcome back, and And today, we turn our attention to the operational mechanics of vendor invoice processing within the accounts payable module. This chapter explores the precise methods for recording liabilities and how the system translates these documents into accounting entries. In Dynamics 365 Finance, the journey of an invoice begins long before it hits the general ledger, often requiring a distinction between invoices matched against existing purchase orders and those representing independent, non-order expenses. When you deal with purchase order invoices, the system performs a three-way matching process, verifying that the vendor invoice aligns with the purchase order lines and the corresponding product receipts. This automated validation ensures that you only pay for what you have actually ordered and received, effectively reducing the risk of overpayment. For expenses that do not originate from a purchase order, such as utility bills or professional services, we rely on vendor invoice journals or invoice registers. These journals provide a mechanism to record the obligation directly to specific ledger accounts or financial dimensions, bypassing the product receipt requirement while still maintaining the integrity of the vendor subledger. By utilizing these distinct entry points, organizations can maintain a rigid control environment while allowing for the necessary flexibility in day-to-day accounts payable operations. Verification often reveals discrepancies that require human intervention, especially when the invoice totals or line item quantities deviate from the system-recorded expectations. If a match is not found, or if price tolerances are exceeded, the system triggers a matching variance that prevents immediate posting. These variances must be acknowledged and resolved through the invoice matching workspace or directly on the vendor invoice document before the transaction can proceed. Furthermore, electronic invoices, often received via vendor collaboration or electronic data interchange scenarios, are handled through the vendor invoice automation workspace. This workspace acts as a digital queue, allowing accounts payable clerks to review, approve, and finalize invoices without the manual overhead of data entry. By configuring invoice automation policies, you can define specific rules that govern the automatic processing of invoices, thereby standardizing the workflow and significantly increasing the speed of the procurement cycle. When we look closer at multi-line invoices, the system allows for granular control over tax allocations and financial dimension distribution at the line level. This is particularly important for organizations that need to split expenses across multiple departments or cost centers during the entry process. As you populate the invoice lines, you are essentially defining the debit side of the accounting distribution, while the vendor balance constitutes the credit. Upon final document posting, Dynamics 365 performs a synchronized update where the vendor subledger is adjusted for the specific vendor account, and an offsetting entry is created in the general ledger. This atomic nature of the posting process ensures that your subledger balances are always in perfect agreement with your general ledger, providing a single source of truth for the organization's financial position. Any associated tax allocations are simultaneously calculated and posted to the configured sales tax accounts, ensuring the transactional record is complete and compliant with regulatory reporting standards. I look forward to our next session together. Hello, and welcome to our deep dive into the invoice matching principles within Dynamics 365 Finance. In this session, we will examine how the system enforces strict governance over procurement through automated validation processes. At its core, invoice matching is an automated control mechanism designed to ensure that the organization pays only for what it has legitimately ordered and received. When we speak about purchase order matching, we are essentially talking about the system's ability to compare the vendor invoice against the underlying purchase order and, where applicable, the product receipt record. This practice creates a rigorous audit trail that forces alignment between the financial commitment made at the time of purchase and the final invoice presented for payment. By delegating these repetitive verification tasks to the application, we reduce the burden of manual oversight while simultaneously minimizing the risks associated with human error or fraudulent activity. If the data points do not align within the pre-configured parameters, the system flags the discrepancies for further review rather than allowing the invoice to proceed to the payment stage. This, in essence, is how we safeguard the enterprise against overcharges and inconsistent billing practices. There are two primary modes of matching that you will encounter frequently: two-way matching and three-way matching. In a two-way matching policy, the system compares the price information on the vendor invoice against that of the purchase order to ensure that the unit price provided by the vendor is within an acceptable variance of the original purchase agreement. This is a baseline control for verifying that we are being billed at the expected rate for the procured goods or services. Three-way matching, however, adds a layer of complexity by introducing the product receipt as a mandatory validation point, along with the purchase order and the vendor invoice. Under this policy, the system validates that the quantity billed on the vendor invoice matches the quantity physically received at our warehouse or facility. This prevents the common scenario where an organization might be billed for items that were never delivered, thereby providing a stronger reconciliation between logistics and accounting operations. To make these policies practical in a real-world environment, Dynamics 365 Finance utilizes the concept of matching tolerances. Because price fluctuations or minor quantity adjustments are sometimes inevitable in large-scale procurement, a rigid system that flags every single penny of deviation would be counterproductive and lead to operational bottlenecks. Administrators configure these tolerances so that the system permits invoices that fall within a defined threshold of acceptable variance while still catching significant errors. For example, if a vendor invoice is 2% higher than the purchase order price, the matching policy might be set to approve it automatically if the tolerance is set to 3%. When a variance exceeds these configured limits, the invoice is suspended in a state of pending approval, which necessitates intervention from internal staff. This workflow-driven approach ensures that discrepancies are not simply ignored, but are routed through the appropriate approval channels to verify the legitimacy of the request. The configuration of these matching principles is not a one-size-fits-all exercise, as it often varies based on the nature of the vendor relationship or the type of materials being purchased. Organizations may choose to apply these rules at the legal entity level or selectively for specific vendors and items. By establishing clear policies and matching tolerances, you essentially build a digital gatekeeper that consistently enforces organizational financial policy. When an invoice fails the matching process, the system generates a clear warning, allowing for a timely reconciliation between the purchasing department and the vendor. This transparency is crucial for maintaining healthy vendor relationships, as it allows procurement teams to identify systemic billing issues with specific vendors early on. Furthermore, because these actions are logged within the system, auditors can easily verify that the company's internal controls are being respected across all transactions in the procure-to-pay workflow. Ultimately, mastering these matching principles is about understanding the transition from manual, error-prone verification to a systematic, rule-based approach. By automating the comparison of purchase orders, product receipts, and vendor invoices, Dynamics 365 Finance provides the necessary visibility into the procurement lifecycle. It allows the financial organization to maintain control over cash outflows while ensuring that vendors are paid promptly when their billings match the agreed-upon terms. This level of control is fundamental to the MB-920 certification, as it bridges the gap between purely transactional record-keeping and intelligent financial management. Remember that these tools are intended to support rather than replace the judgment of financial professionals who must handle the exceptions. With this foundation, you should be able to identify how these policies function in any given business scenario you might encounter on your exam or in practice. I will see you in the next study unit. Welcome to our exploration of vendor payment journals, where we will examine how Dynamics 365 Finance handles the systematic settlement of liabilities. This chapter focuses on the mechanics of accounts payable, specifically the automated workflows required to manage vendor disbursements efficiently. In Dynamics 365 Finance, the vendor payment journal serves as the primary mechanism for executing disbursements against open vendor invoices. When we talk about these journals, we are referring to a structured ledger process that ensures all payments are traceable, authorized, and accurately reflected in the general ledger. Unlike simple manual payments, which lack the audit trail and bulk processing capabilities required by modern enterprises, the payment journal allows for the use of payment proposals. A payment proposal is a powerful tool that automatically identifies open invoices based on your selected criteria, such as specific due dates or available cash discounts. By leveraging this tool, you remove the risk of human error during the selection process and ensure that terms, such as early payment discounts, are captured consistently whenever the organization has the liquidity to pay early. The workflow begins by creating a new journal header where you select the appropriate bank account that will fund the transaction. Once the headers are defined, you invoke the payment proposal function, which scans the vendor subledger for due liabilities. You can filter these by vendor groups, specific vendors, or payment methods, providing granular control over your cash outflow. After the system populates the journal lines with the selected invoices, you have the opportunity to review the settlements before they are finalized. This is where you might adjust payment amounts if a partial payment is required, or override the settlement date if the banking timeline necessitates it. Because Dynamics 365 is multi-currency capable, if an invoice is in a foreign currency, the system will automatically calculate the difference between the exchange rate at the time of invoice and the rate at the time of payment. These realized currency gains or losses are calculated behind the scenes, ensuring your ledger remains reconciled without manual intervention or spreadsheets. Once the payment lines are prepared, the next phase involves the selection of the payment method, which determines the nature of the output. The system supports various formats, ranging from printed checks to complex electronic payment files required by local banking infrastructures. These electronic payment files are generated through the Electronic Reporting Framework, a configurable toolset that allows you to map internal data fields to the specific XML or flat file specifications required by different banks. This electronic integration is a hallmark of the modern finance module, as it significantly reduces the time spent on manual bank entry and eliminates the common mistakes associated with data reentry. When you trigger the generation of these files, the journal entries are validated against the bank payment format requirements to ensure that all necessary information, such as routing numbers and account details, is present. This validation essentially acts as an early warning system, preventing rejected batch files and unnecessary delays in vendor relations. After the payment media is generated and transmitted to the banking partner, the final step in the life cycle is posting the journal. When you post a payment journal, several things happen simultaneously within the system architecture. First, the bank subledger is updated, reflecting the outflow of cash from the specified account. Second, the vendor subledger is updated, marking the previously open invoices as settled. This settlement process is vital because it closes off the vendor balance and updates the aged payables reports, ensuring that your view of outstanding debt is always accurate and current. Furthermore, the general ledger receives the accounting entries generated by the posting profile associated with the vendor and the bank. This ensures that the integration between subledgers and the general ledger remains perfectly synced without requiring supplemental reconciliation entries later in the accounting period. The beauty of this integrated approach is that it standardizes the accounting cycle across all departments, regardless of the vendor or currency involved. By using consistent payment journals, an organization ensures that every outbound transaction follows the same compliance validation and approval routing. This provides not only a clean audit trail, but also predictable and repeatable financial data. It allows finance professionals to shift their focus from the mundane clerical tasks of creating individual entries to managing liquidity and optimizing cash flow based on the real-time reporting supplied by the system. As you look at your ledger, you will see exactly which invoices have been satisfied, which discounts were secured, and the precise impact of currency fluctuations on the bottom line. This level of visibility is precisely what makes Dynamics 365 Finance a robust platform for managing complex global accounts payable cycles. I hope this overview clarifies the mechanics of vendor payments. See you in the next session. Welcome to the module on expense management, where we examine the mechanics of corporate spend tracking and employee reimbursement. Today, we will discuss how to structure these systems effectively within the broader finance ecosystem. Expense management in Dynamics 365 is not merely about tracking receipts. It is about establishing a rigorous framework that turns disparate employee spending into structured financial data. At the foundational level, we define granular expense categories that categorize transactions into distinct buckets, such as travel, office supplies, or lodging. Each category is bound to specific ledger accounts, ensuring that when an employee submits a report, the underlying financial posting is already determined by the system's configuration. This level of granularity is essential for cost center allocation, allowing the finance team to drill down into exactly how and where capital is being deployed across the organization. Without this structured classification, reconciliation becomes an exercise in manual data entry, which is prone to human error. By enforcing these categories at the point of entry, we shift the burden of classification away from accounting staff and onto the originators of the spend. To maintain financial discipline, the system permits the implementation of complex travel policy rules. These policies act as automated gatekeepers, validating expenses against predefined thresholds or restrictions before they reach an approval queue. For instance, you might configure a policy that caps the daily meal reimbursement amount or mandates that airfare must be booked through a specific corporate travel portal. When an employee submits a report that violates these constraints, the system can trigger an automated warning or block the submission entirely until justification is provided. This programmatic enforcement ensures that corporate policy is applied consistently across the entire workforce, regardless of geography or department. It transforms the policy document from a static file buried on an intranet into a living, functional component of the workflow engine. This proactive approach to compliance significantly mitigates the risk of non-compliant spending before it is ever processed. A significant portion of modern corporate expenditure flows through company credit or procurement cards, and the system addresses this through automated transaction mapping. Instead of requiring employees to manually transcribe transaction details, Dynamics 365 imports bank feeds directly, allowing users to match card transactions to their expense reports. This process reduces the administrative overhead associated with manual verification and improves the integrity of the data. Furthermore, card mapping ensures that the purchase is recorded in the currency and amount specified by the financial institution, eliminating discrepancies between bank statements and internal ledgers. If a transaction is flagged as a duplicate or originates from an unrecognized merchant, the system provides audit trails that simplify the reconciliation process. This capability ensures that the corporate bank reconciliation is performed with higher fidelity and speed, as clear audit trails follow every digital transaction entry. The actual approval journey is managed through multi-tiered workflows that dictate how expense reports traverse the organizational hierarchy. These workflows are configurable to support delegation, conditional logic, and specific approval thresholds based on the department or the total value of the expense report. For example, a travel report under a certain amount might move directly to a manager for approval, while a higher value expense requires additional oversight from the finance department or a department head. The mobile capabilities of the platform extend these workflows, granting managers the ability to review reports and grant approvals while on the move. This responsiveness is vital to maintaining rapid reimbursement cycles, which in turn improves employee satisfaction. By aligning the approval process with the operational realities of a distributed team, the organization ensures that financial hurdles do not impede business operations. When an expense report is fully approved, the system automates the transition from request to financial truth through the generation of vendor invoice records or journals. This integration is the final step in the lifecycle, where the system automatically credits the employee's account, functioning as a vendor, or records the debit against the relevant expense account in the general ledger. Because this happens within a unified database, there is no need to manually synchronize data between disparate applications or export files to a secondary accounting package. The transaction is instantly visible in the financial reports, providing leadership with real-time insight into the organization's burn rate and operational expenditures. This instantaneous reflection of spend is what separates an efficient, digital-first finance department from one struggling with legacy reporting delays. It ensures that the general ledger remains accurate, defensible, and perfectly aligned with the day-to-day realities of corporate spend. I will see you in our next session. Hello there. Let us turn our attention to the foundational structures that govern how an organization interacts with its base of customers. In this chapter, we will rigorously examine the mechanics of customer master record management and the associated financial controls required within Dynamics 365 Finance. When we approach the topic of customer profile governance, we must fundamentally view the customer record not merely as a contact entry, but as a robust configuration that dictates the life cycle of all subsequent business transactions. At the heart of this architecture lies the customer group, which serves as a primary classification tool used to consolidate customers with similar financial profiles. By assigning a customer to a group, we inherently define critical behaviors such as default ledger posting accounts, sales tax groups, and default payment terms. This is essential because, without this level of standardization, ensuring consistency in financial reporting across diverse business units becomes a manual and error-prone process. We must recognize that the customer group is the anchor point for many of the automated parameters that reduce operational overhead in the accounts receivable module. When you configure these groups correctly, you effectively automate the propagation of financial settings to every new customer record created within that category. Beyond simple grouping, the integrity of our customer data depends heavily on its relationship with the global address book. Dynamics 365 Finance utilizes this centralized repository to ensure that name and contact information remains synchronized regardless of whether a party acts as a customer, a vendor, or a prospect. This design choice prevents data redundancy and ensures that updates made at the party level cascade correctly across all functional areas of the application. When configuring a customer, we often apply mandatory financial dimension templates, which enforce strict adherence to an organization's specific reporting hierarchy. If a business requires that every transaction be tagged by department, cost center, and region, assigning these dimensions at the customer master level ensures that downstream invoicing is automatically populated with the necessary metadata. Consequently, this leads to cleaner financial statements because the data entry errors typically associated with manual tagging are eliminated at the point of origin. Credit management is another pillar of effective customer governance that requires a clear understanding of the interaction between manual limits and automated hold logic. Within the customer record, we define specific credit limits that serve as the threshold for order entry validation. When a sales order is processed, the system checks these configured limits against the customer's current balance and pending obligations. If a customer exceeds their established limit, the system can be configured to strictly block the order or issue a warning, thereby protecting the company from excessive credit exposure. This logic is not just a safety valve. It is a fundamental aspect of the order-to-cash lifecycle that ensures cash flow stability. Integration with automated credit hold processes allows finance departments to maintain control over revenue recognition without needing to intervene in every single transaction manually. The operational efficiency of the accounts receivable team is also heavily influenced by how we define default payment schedules and collection prefixes within these master records. A payment schedule determines the installment structure or the due date calculations applied to an invoice, which dictates the cash receipt schedule for the organization. By setting these defaults on the customer card, we remove the burden of manual selection from the order entry staff, who might otherwise choose inconsistent terms. Furthermore, the use of collection prefixes and associated management techniques allows for better segmentation of accounts that require varying levels of attention from collections personnel. By embedding these configurations into the customer profile, we create a predictable framework that allows the system to handle routine tasks efficiently. This shift from manual intervention to parameter-driven automation is precisely how Dynamics 365 handles systemic organizational growth without requiring a proportional increase in administrative staff. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this session, we will examine the architectural components of the sales order lifecycle and how they integrate with downstream financial processes. The architecture of a sales order in Dynamics 365 Finance is built upon a hierarchical structure that necessitates a clear separation between the header and line items. The sales order header serves as the foundational container, housing critical metadata such as the customer account, currency, terms of delivery, and site configurations. When you define these parameters at the header level, the system cascades them down to the individual lines, ensuring data integrity across the entire document. This arrangement is not merely a data entry convenience, but a functional constraint that dictates how the system evaluates trade agreements and tax rules. If you modify a delivery date on the header, the system prompts you with a decision to update all existing lines, illustrating the parent-child relationship that governs the order. Developers and functional consultants alike should view this structure as a state machine where the header tracks the overall status of the document, while lines track the inventory fulfillment lifecycle. Understanding this distinction is essential because financial subledger entries are often tied to specific line-level actions rather than the order as a whole. Managing pricing and trade agreements requires a precise understanding of how the application performs lookups during the creation phase. When adding line items, Dynamics 365 automates the pricing logic by evaluating trade agreements, which allow for multi-tiered discounts based on combinations of products, customer groups, and date ranges. These agreements act as a lookup table that the engine queries the moment a product identifier is selected in a sales order line. It is a deterministic process that considers quantity breaks, meaning the system will automatically apply a higher discount percentage if the line quantity exceeds a pre-configured threshold. Furthermore, the application provides real-time inventory validation, which checks availability against the configured warehouse and site logic defined in the item master. This is not a static check, but a dynamic one that accounts for reserved inventory and incoming supply orders, providing an accurate view of what can feasibly be promised to the customer. The confirmation phase of the sales order lifecycle introduces critical financial controls, most notably the automatic enforcement of customer credit limits. Before an order can move from an open state to a confirmed one, the system calculates the customer's total liability by aggregating current balances, pending orders, and the proposed sales order value. If the resulting figure exceeds the assigned credit limit, the application triggers a validation rule that either warns the user or blocks confirmation entirely, depending on the credit management setup. This mechanism is a proactive measure designed to minimize bad debt exposure before any physical fulfillment activities occur. Once the order is confirmed, the system creates a permanent record of the agreement, which serves as the trigger for inventory reservation. From an accounting perspective, this milestone also signals that the business is now committed to the transaction, even if the goods have not yet left the warehouse. As the order progresses into the fulfillment cycle, the physical orchestration of picking and packing generates distinct subledger milestones. When items are picked from the warehouse, the system accounts for inventory value movements within the underlying financial dimensions, effectively moving goods from general inventory to a shipped or issued state. These movements are essential for maintaining visibility into the cost of goods sold, as they capture the realization of inventory value at the time of consumption. Packing slips are then generated to evidence the delivery, and these documents provide the data point required for revenue recognition in professional accounting environments. Throughout this process, every transaction is logged with timestamps and user attribution, which forms the audit trail necessitated by standard compliance and financial reporting requirements. Billing is only permitted once these physical checkpoints have been acknowledged, ensuring that the invoice reflects the exact quantities that have successfully left the facility. See you in the upcoming session. Welcome back. In this lesson, we will focus on the financial mechanics behind customer invoicing, specifically addressing how we realize revenue through different document types within the accounts receivable module. When we handle revenue recognition in Dynamics 365 Finance, we must distinguish between the structured lifecycle of a sales order and the ad hoc nature of a free text invoice. A sales order invoice is the terminal point of a physical or service-based fulfillment process where the system has tracked the movement of goods or the consumption of labor through packing slips. Because the sales order is linked to specific inventory items or predefined service items, the system automatically pulls the price, quantity, and cost mapping established in the product master. This automation ensures that once the shipment or installation is confirmed, the invoice generation process is a declarative act that triggers the necessary subledger updates. Conversely, a free text invoice is decoupled from the inventory transaction pipeline, serving as a clean sheet for revenue that does not require item tracking. This is typically used for miscellaneous charges, one-off consulting fees, or rental income, where you define the ledger distribution directly on the invoice lines. When you post a free text invoice, you bypass the demand-driven logic of sales orders and instead manually designate the main account and financial dimensions for the revenue. Both methods eventually converge in the general ledger, but they originate from distinct operational realities within the supply chain. The financial posting logic underpinning these documents is designed to maintain the integrity of your balance sheet and income statements simultaneously. When any customer invoice is posted, the system performs a multi-layered update that shifts balances in the customer subledger while reflecting those changes in the general ledger. The system identifies the specific customer record via the account ID, creating a debit entry in the customer's open balance account. Simultaneously, it looks at the tax group assigned to the customer and the item or ledger account, calculating the output sales tax obligation and recording it to the appropriate liability account in the ledger. The revenue side is then balanced against the credit side of the journal entry, ensuring that the trial balance remains preserved. If you are dealing with a sales order, the system also cleans up the interim inventory accounts to finalize the cost of goods sold, assuming that you have already processed the packing slip. With a free text invoice, the process is slightly leaner as there is no removal of inventory value, so the transaction focuses purely on cash inflow expectations and revenue recognition. Understanding this distinction is vital because the choice of document type dictates how your financial controllers track cost centers versus revenue sources. Efficiency often necessitates handling high volumes of documentation, which is where batch invoicing routines become critical for any finance department. Instead of manually triggering invoice posts for every individual order, users can leverage the batch processing framework to group these tasks during off-peak hours, reducing the latency experienced by the user interface during busy periods. These batch routines allow you to query for all sales orders that have reached their confirmed shipment status and push them through the posting process in a single execution thread. If corrections are needed after an invoice has been finalized, we employ the credit note mechanism, which is essentially the mirror image of an invoice. By selecting the original invoice and initiating a correction, the system reverses the subledger entry and realigns the ledger distributions to offset the previous tax and revenue recognition. This ensures that your audit trail remains immutable and transparent, as you are rarely deleting historical logs, but rather introducing compensating transactions. Whether you are automating large cycles or performing surgical corrections on individual account balances, the architectural consistency of the accounts receivable framework ensures your reporting remains accurate. Mastering these workflows provides the necessary predictability that stakeholders expect when analyzing the cash conversion cycle of the organization. I look forward to our next discussion on customer payment processing. Welcome to our exploration of customer payment processing, where we focus on how Dynamics 365 Finance handles incoming funds and reconciles them against outstanding receivables. Managing accounts receivable effectively requires a robust understanding of how payments originate and interact with existing transaction records. When a customer submits a payment, whether via a traditional paper check or an electronic funds transfer, the system relies on payment journals as the primary entry point. These journals act as a staging area where ledger entries are validated against specific customer invoices before they are permanently committed to the general ledger. Manual check entry involves specifying the payment date, transaction currency, and the specific customer account, followed by a settlement process that links the receipt to one or more open invoices. Accuracy here is paramount, as any discrepancy between the payment amount and the invoice balance triggers secondary processes involving either remaining open balances or accounting adjustments. Automated customer payment proposal engines offer a more efficient alternative to manual entry by leveraging defined criteria to identify eligible invoices for settlement. This is particularly useful for organizations handling high volumes of transactions, as the system can automatically suggest which invoices to offset based on payment dates and customer history. Beyond simple automated identification, the settlement engine is sophisticated enough to handle complex scenarios like overpayments or underpayments. When a customer pays too much, the system can designate the excess as an on-account balance for future use or as a refund. Conversely, an underpayment requires specific configuration, often involving tolerance settings, to determine if the remaining small balance should be written off or left as an outstanding debt that requires follow-up from the collections department. One of the most powerful features within this workflow is the management of cash discounts and their impact on realized revenue. Dynamics 365 Finance dynamically calculates discounts based on specific terms defined at the customer or invoice level, such as a percentage reduction for payments made within a certain time frame. When a payment is posted, the settlement engine automatically detects if the payment date qualifies for these terms and adjusts the ledger accordingly. This automation ensures that the customer account balance accurately reflects the reduced payment amount while correctly recording the discount expense in the general ledger. It prevents the manual intervention typically required to bridge the gap between a net payment and a gross invoice amount. Real-time bank reconciliation begins the moment a payment journal is posted, as the system immediately updates the associated bank account balance. This tight integration ensures that the financial data seen in the accounts receivable workspace remains perfectly synchronized with the organization's cash position. When electronic bank feeds or imported files are used, the system attempts to perform automatic matching between bank transactions and the entries created in our journals. Any transactions that fail this automated matching reside in a suspense or error state, requiring manual classification to complete the reconciliation loop. This continuous, real-time approach to updating ledgers and reconciling bank accounts is what separates modern ERP solutions from legacy systems that rely on batch-processed accounting. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back to the course, where we now turn our attention to the credit and collections workspace. In this lesson, we will examine the mechanisms designed to maintain liquidity by managing customer debt effectively. Effective credit management begins with the understanding that not all customer accounts require the same level of oversight. Within finance, the credit and collections workspace acts as a centralized command center where financial analysts monitor outstanding balances. By utilizing the aged balances view, one can categorize customers based on the age of their unpaid invoices. This prioritization is crucial because it allows the collections team to focus their limited efforts on accounts that represent the highest risk to the organization's cash flow. Rather than manually tracking each invoice, the system automatically groups overdue transactions, ensuring that no account slips through the cracks. This structured approach to data is what separates a reactive collections team from a proactive, data-driven one. Automated workflows further enhance these capabilities by streamlining repetitive tasks like sending reminders. Collection letters can be configured to trigger at specific intervals, such as 30, 60, or 90 days past the due date. This automation ensures consistency in the communication process, as every customer receives the same professional level of engagement regardless of their specific representative. Additionally, you can configure overdue interest codes to automatically calculate penalties on late payments based on the organization's credit policies. These codes are applied to the customer's account balance, serving as a financial incentive for the customer to settle their obligations promptly. By offloading these calculations to the system, you eliminate the risk of human error or inconsistency in interest application. Beyond simple automated reminders, the system provides advanced tools for managing more complex delinquency scenarios through collection cases. When a customer repeatedly fails to fulfill payment terms, a collection case can be opened to document all communications, promises to pay, and historical notes. This creates a forensic trail that is invaluable for internal audits or when determining whether to escalate an account to a third-party collection agency. You may also update the customer's status, such as putting an account on credit hold, which prevents the entry of new sales orders until the financial issue is resolved. This level of control is essential for protecting the organizational balance sheet from further exposure when dealing with persistent non-payment or financial instability. Ultimately, some debts remain uncollectible, regardless of the rigorous efforts applied during the collection cycle. In such instances, the system provides a structured process for executing bad debt write-offs to remove these items from the general ledger. This process requires careful configuration to ensure that the write-off is mapped to the correct financial dimensions in ledger accounts for reporting clarity. By maintaining a clean set of receivables, you ensure that the organization's financial statements accurately reflect the true, recoverable value of its assets. Configuring these pools and write-off parameters correctly is a fundamental task for any administrator tasked with maintaining the integrity of the order-to-cash cycle. These tools provide the necessary oversight to optimize cash inflows while minimizing the impact of unavoidable losses on your financial outlook. I will see you in the next installment. Welcome to our deep dive into the commerce and retail capabilities within Dynamics 365 Finance. We will examine how omnichannel sales architectures integrate with core financial structures to maintain accounting integrity across high-volume environments. When we discuss commerce in the context of Dynamics 365, we are essentially talking about the reconciliation of disparate transactional streams into a singular financial truth. An omnichannel ecosystem allows a business to engage with customers through brick-and-mortar point-of-sale terminals, e-commerce storefronts, and social commerce platforms simultaneously. The challenge from a financial perspective is that each of these channels generates a massive volume of granular transactional data that must eventually reside within the general ledger. Dynamics 365 Commerce addresses this by acting as an intermediary service, aggregating individual transactions before they are processed as batch statements. This aggregation is not merely for tidy reporting, but is a foundational requirement for subledger integrity. By centralizing the management of these channels, the system ensures that the financial data remains auditable and consistent, regardless of whether a purchase originated from a physical shelf or a digital cart. The heart of this integration lies in the point-of-sale statement posting process, which translates retail activities into actionable financial journals. When a store or an e-commerce channel closes a shift or a period, the system creates a retail statement that summarizes all the sales, returns, and taxes incurred during that time frame. These statements are then posted to the subledger, which effectively bridges the gap between front office sales activity and back office revenue accounting. This posting process is vital because it ensures that cash, credit card payments, and gift card redemptions are accurately reconciled against the bank accounts and clearing accounts linked to the respective channels. If you imagine a company processing thousands of small transactions daily, manually accounting for each one would be a recipe for disaster. The statement posting logic automates this, ensuring the accounts receivable subledger is updated without requiring an accountant to intervene for every single purchase. Financial integration extends further into the management of liabilities, particularly when considering customer loyalty programs and payment tokens. Loyalty programs are essentially a form of deferred revenue or liability to the retailer, as they represent a promise of future value to the customer. Dynamics 365 Commerce tracks these points as they are earned and redeemed, recording the corresponding financial impact in the retail transaction journals. Simultaneously, the system handles payment tokens, which are secure, vaulted representations of sensitive customer financial data that allow for authorized settlements without storing raw card numbers in the database. When a transaction is settled, the payment token is used to sync with the payment processor, and the resulting settlement is automatically reconciled with the back-office subledgers. This automated flow minimizes the risk of human error in reconciliation and provides the clarity needed to track financial performance with high precision. Beyond reconciliation, centralized fraud protection serves as a critical defense mechanism within this architecture. Because retail channels are prime targets for malicious activity, Dynamics 365 integrates real-time fraud protection services that analyze user behavior and transaction patterns across all channels. From a financial impact perspective, this protection is instrumental in reducing chargebacks and potential revenue loss. When the system detects fraudulent behavior, it can block a transaction before it ever reaches the financial journals, thereby preserving the cleanliness of the ledger. This means that when you review your retail reports, you are looking at verified, legitimate business transactions that have already passed through a rigorous screening layer. This integration illustrates how Dynamics 365 treats security and financial accountability as two sides of the same coin, ensuring that business operations remain both profitable and resilient against external threats. Ultimately, all these moving parts funnel into the corporate ledgers, providing a comprehensive view of retail performance that satisfies strict accounting standards. The system provides a unified data platform where the financial dimension structure remains consistent across retail operations and core financial processes. By leveraging pre-built integration frameworks, organizations can standardize their chart of accounts and ensure that sales generated in a retail channel are automatically mapped to the correct revenue and tax accounts. This structural alignment eliminates the friction often found in legacy systems where retail data is siloed away from corporate financial oversight. As businesses continue to expand their digital footprint, this deep integration ensures that they can maintain a single, accurate ledger that reflects the reality of their multi-channel enterprise. We have established that high-volume retail operations require this level of automation to function reliably within the broader scope of Dynamics 365 Finance. See you in the next lecture. Hello, and welcome back. Today, we look at the configuration of bank accounts within Dynamics 365 Finance. In the Cash and Bank Management module, the foundational element of any banking configuration is the bank group. A bank group acts as a logical construct that enables you to group common parameters shared by multiple bank accounts held at the same financial institution. By defining a bank group first, you streamline the data entry process, as attributes like the routing number or the bank's country code are inherited by the specific bank accounts linked to that group. When you create a unique bank account, you associate it with a bank group to minimize administrative overhead and ensure consistency across your legal entities. It is essential to recognize that while you define these groups for operational convenience, they also serve as a governance layer for managing regional banking requirements. You are essentially building a template that ensures every transaction emanating from your organization adheres to the predefined regulatory requirements of the corresponding financial institution. Once the bank group is established, you proceed to define the individual bank account record, which links your business operations to the physical banking site. You must assign a unique bank account number and select the appropriate currency, which has significant implications for how Dynamics 365 Finance handles multi-currency transactions. A vital configuration step involves binding the bank account to a main account in the general ledger. This binding ensures that every cash outflow or inflow is automatically reflected in your accounting records, maintaining the integrity of your balance sheet. Without this ledger mapping, the system would be unable to provide the real-time financial transparency necessary for effective liquidity management. Consequently, the bank account record acts as the bridge between your internal ledger and the external financial partner, facilitating automated reconciliation and auditability. The complexity of modern corporate finance necessitates robust support for electronic payments and standardized check processing. Within the setup, you must configure electronic payment formats that align with the proprietary requirements of your banks, such as ISO 20022 or local clearing formats. This involves defining the specific layout of the payment files, which includes mapping transaction types to the specific codes required by the bank's clearing network. Similarly, managing check layouts requires precise configuration of paper stock dimensions and MICR line formatting to ensure that payments can be processed without manual intervention. By codifying these rules within the system, you transition from manual, error-prone disbursements to a secure, automated framework. This level of configuration is non-negotiable for large organizations operating across multiple jurisdictions and dealing with high transaction volumes. Tracking multi-currency parameters represents the final layer of sophistication in bank account governance. When dealing with foreign currency accounts, you must specify the exchange rate type and revaluation principles that dictate how your balances are adjusted at the end of each reporting period. If you fail to configure these parameters correctly, your financial statements will not accurately reflect the impact of currency fluctuations on your cash position. Additionally, you should map transaction types to ensure that every deposit, withdrawal, or service charge is categorized appropriately for reporting and reconciliation purposes. By establishing these strict controls, you provide the finance team with the tools to track localized fund movements while maintaining a global view of the company's liquidity. The entire framework is designed to balance the tension between regional banking flexibility and centralized financial oversight. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this chapter, we explore the mechanics of bank reconciliation within Dynamics 365 Finance, focusing on how to maintain accurate cash balances by aligning internal records with external data. The primary objective of bank reconciliation is to ensure that the transactions recorded in your general ledger accurately reflect the reality of your external bank statements. In a manual reconciliation scenario, an accounts payable or receivable clerk would traditionally compare individual line items, such as checks issued or deposits made, against a paper statement provided by the bank. While this approach is functional for small businesses with low transaction volumes, it quickly becomes unsustainable as complexity increases. The manual process requires significant human intervention, which introduces a high probability of data entry errors and omissions. Furthermore, tracking down discrepancies in a manual system often feels like finding a needle in a haystack, requiring hours of tedious spreadsheet work. Organizations must therefore look toward more efficient methods to manage their cash positions effectively without consuming excessive internal resources. Advanced bank reconciliation in Dynamics 365 Finance shifts the paradigm from manual labor to automated logical processing. This functionality allows you to import electronic bank statements directly from your financial institution using various standard formats like BAI2, MT940, or XML. Once the external data is ingested, the system creates a bridge between the digital bank statement and your internal records. The core of this automation lies in the configuration of matching rules, which define the logic for pairing bank transactions with ledger transactions. These matching rules can evaluate criteria such as transaction type, specific reference numbers, transaction dates, and precise currency amounts. When multiple parameters must align before a match is considered valid, the system provides a high level of confidence that the reconciled entries are accurate and trustworthy. The reconciliation workspace serves as the centralized hub for managing these tasks. providing a comprehensive view of pending matches versus cleared transactions. Within this workspace, you can execute reconciliation worksheets, which act as a staging area where matching rules are applied to the data in bulk. If a bank statement includes items that are not yet in your system, such as bank service fees, interest charges, or unexpected wire transfer costs, the process allows for the creation of correction vouchers. By generating these journals directly from the reconciliation process, you ensure that the general ledger is updated in real time to reflect these external changes. This eliminates the need to perform separate, disconnected entries later in the accounting cycle, thereby streamlining the month-end closing process. Configuring advanced matching rules is perhaps the most critical step in minimizing accounting overhead. You define these rules by establishing a hierarchy of criteria, instructing the system on how to behave when a perfect match is not immediately obvious. For instance, you might define a rule that allows for a small variance in amount, effectively accounting for minor discrepancies in foreign exchange calculations or processing fees. Additionally, you can specify that transactions must fall within a certain date range to be eligible for automatic reconciliation. These parameters allow the system to handle high volumes of transactional data with minimal disruption to your daily operations. By automating the routine matching, your accountants can shift their focus toward researching and resolving true exceptions, rather than matching checks that have already cleared. Ultimately, the goal is to reduce the time spent on administrative tasks while simultaneously increasing the integrity of your financial data. When the system automatically matches the majority of your line items, the manual audit work is significantly reduced, allowing for a more frequent and accurate snapshot of your cash position. This efficiency is especially vital for treasury departments that require up-to-the-minute visibility into available liquidity for operational or investment purposes. Because Dynamics 365 Finance acts as a single source of truth for both the subledger and the general ledger, the reconciliation process inherently keeps the accounts in sync. By leveraging these advanced features, you move away from reactive accounting and toward a proactive state of financial control. Maintaining this degree of discipline is essential for any organization, regardless of size, that prioritizes financial accuracy and operational efficiency. I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome to our exploration of cash flow forecasting within Dynamics 365 Finance. We will examine how the system leverages transactional data to provide visibility into future liquidity. At its core, cash flow forecasting is an exercise in data aggregation. To project liquidity, Dynamics 365 Finance must draw from multiple distinct modules, effectively creating a centralized view of financial health. Information is not pulled in isolation, but is instead mapped through specific dependencies that connect your day-to-day operations to strategic planning. For instance, the system considers open obligations from the accounts payable module, such as pending vendor invoices and purchase orders, alongside expected inflows from accounts receivable, like open sales orders and historical customer payment behavior. By integrating these sources, the application generates a forecast that reflects both immediate liabilities and anticipated receipts. This process relies on a robust data structure where every transaction carries the necessary metadata to inform the forecasting engine. The mechanics behind this forecasting engine require a careful configuration of the cash and bank management module. You must define the source of the data, which involves mapping ledger accounts, order types, and budget positions to the forecasting matrix. When you configure a liquidity account, for example, you're essentially telling the system which bank accounts and general ledger accounts should be included in the total cash position. Furthermore, the inclusion of budget register entries allows the system to factor in planned capital expenditures that might not yet have a formal purchase order. This provides an executive-level look at potential cash outflows even when specific procurement processes have not yet fully matured. By factoring in these budget entries alongside real-world transactional data, the system creates a holistic environment for analyzing capital allocation. Historical data plays a surprisingly significant role in refining these projections. Dynamics 365 Finance does not simply sum up current balances. It uses historical customer payment trends to calculate expected cash receipts from open invoices. If a particular client systematically pays 30 days past the due date, the forecasting engine can apply these observed trends to its calculations, providing a more reliable date for the cash inflow. This adjustment makes the forecast much more actionable for treasury teams who need to understand when capital will actually be available versus when it is merely contractually due. By relying on pattern recognition rather than just contractual deadlines, the system moves beyond basic accounting towards true financial forecasting that reflects fiscal reality. Beyond accounts receivable and payable, the forecasting model considers planned asset acquisitions and depreciation. This is critical for organizations that manage high-value equipment or recurring infrastructure investments. If your organization has planned asset acquisitions, these can be incorporated into the cash flow forecast to ensure that long-term liquidity plans align with capital expenditures. When you link these planned acquisitions to the liquidity engine, it effectively alerts stakeholders to impending cash dips. This capability empowers the finance team to coordinate with procurement and operations, ensuring that investment decisions are backed by sufficient liquidity without causing undue financial strain. The integration between the asset management functionality and the forecasting matrix ensures that no significant financial event is overlooked. The utility of these forecasts is ultimately realized in the hands of the executive team. Leaders need to make capital allocation and investment decisions based on accurate data, not spreadsheets that are days or weeks out of date. Dynamics 365 Finance provides this through real-time updates and customizable workspace views. When a new invoice is posted or a payment journal is finalized, the forecast is automatically updated to reflect these changes. This immediacy is what decouples the finance team from manual data reentry and allows them to focus on analyzing the results rather than constructing them. By maintaining a centralized forecasting matrix, the organization establishes a single source of truth for its financial standing, which is essential for auditability and strategic agility. It is worth noting that the system allows for the creation of multiple forecast models simultaneously. You might run a conservative scenario that assumes longer payment delays from customers and compare it against an optimistic plan that relies on tighter collection processes. This comparative analysis is fundamental to sound financial planning, as it accounts for market volatility and operational risks. Defining these scenarios requires consistent input from across the organizational hierarchy, as the accuracy of the model is entirely dependent on the quality of the transactional data input at the source. If your staff does not manage the purchase order lifecycle or customer payments with discipline, the forecasting engine will reflect that noise. Effective cash flow forecasting is not a standalone activity because it is deeply embedded in the operational fabric of your Dynamics 365 implementation. You are consistently building toward a reliable future view whenever you process invoices, settle payments, or update your ledger entries. Maintain your transactional integrity to ensure that management receives the insight they require. I hope this overview clarifies the mechanics of forecasting in Dynamics 365 Finance. See you in the next installment. Welcome back. We are now arriving at the segment dedicated to Asset Lifecycle Management, where we examine the operational and financial stewardship of long-term resources. In the ecosystem of Dynamics 365 Finance, effective asset management ensures that an organization's capital investments are tracked from acquisition to final retirement. We begin with the concept of fixed asset groups, which serve as the primary configuration layer for grouping assets with similar characteristics such as depreciation profiles and service lives. By assigning an asset to a specific group, the system automatically applies predefined rules that govern how that asset behaves within the general ledger. Creating an asset master record is the foundational step, capturing essential static data like identification numbers, physical location, and responsible departments. This record allows for precise tracing, ensuring that the financial value of an item is always linked to its operational existence within the facility. Beyond basic tracking, the system relies on fixed asset books to maintain the financial health of each item. These books hold the logic for depreciation, allowing you to run different calculations for internal corporate reporting versus regulatory tax reporting. This dual-layer approach is particularly valuable when tax authorities mandate specific depreciation methods that differ from your standard accounting practices. By leveraging these separate books, organizations avoid manual adjustments while maintaining complete transparency for both stakeholders and auditors. The integration between the fixed assets module and the procurement lifecycle is a critical pillar of this functionality. When you acquire a new asset through a purchase order, the system can automatically create the asset record upon the posting of the vendor invoice. This link is vital for maintaining an accurate audit trail, as it bridges the gap between the initial accounts payable entry and the start of the asset's depreciable life. Once the asset is active, you utilize these records to manage ongoing maintenance schedules and record physical location changes. Keeping this data current ensures that you know exactly where an asset resides and when it is due for preventative servicing, which extends the operational lifespan of the equipment. If you neglect these updates, you risk losing visibility into the actual condition of your resources, which can negatively impact long-term financial forecasting and internal control audits. Furthermore, each asset movement is preserved in the history of the record, providing a comprehensive timeline for compliance assessments. By treating assets as dynamic entities rather than static numbers, you enable the organization to optimize its return on investment and ensure that data captured at the point of procurement remains accurate throughout the entire life cycle. The complexity of modern financial landscapes demands a system that can handle multiple regulatory reporting trackings without sacrificing efficiency. The fixed asset book functionality performs this heavy lifting by allowing you to associate multiple book types with a single asset record. For instance, you might have one book configured for straight-line depreciation for your financial books, while another is configured to comply with declining balance rules mandated by regional tax laws. The system processes these concurrently, calculating and updating the net book value separately for each book type. This architecture removes the necessity for shadow spreadsheets or manual journal entries, which are historically prone to human error and difficult to reconcile. Whenever you post an acquisition, adjustment, or write-down, the system handles the double entry impacts according to the parameters defined in the associated books. This ensures that the general ledger remains perfectly balanced across all regulatory frameworks, providing the consistency that auditors expect. Ultimately, this integration facilitates a cleaner, more defensible financial statement that accurately reflects both the economic reality of the business and the specific requirements of tax jurisdictions. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back, and let's dive into the mechanics of handling fixed assets within Dynamics 365 Finance. In this chapter, we will explore the life cycle of tangible assets, specifically focusing on how they enter your books and lose value over their useful life. You will learn to navigate the acquisition process through various procurement channels and understand the configuration of depreciation profiles essential for accurate financial reporting. By the end of this module, you will have a clear grasp of how periodic depreciation runs update the general ledger and impact the net book value of your company's investments. When we talk about asset acquisition, we are effectively moving an item from a state of procurement into a recognized fixed asset record within the system. You can initiate this journey through a purchase order, which is the most common method when acquiring assets from external vendors, as it allows for formal tracking and invoice matching. Alternatively, if you are acquiring assets through inventory, you might use an inventory journal to reclassify items from your stock into fixed asset records, ensuring your balance sheet accurately reflects reality. For adjustments or manual entries, the direct fixed asset journal provides a dedicated space to register assets without needing a preceding procurement document. Regardless of the entry point, the system ultimately creates a transaction that impacts both the subledger for fixed assets and the general ledger, establishing the initial acquisition cost. This cost serves as the primary basis for subsequent calculations, and it is vital to ensure that your posting profiles are correctly mapped to asset groups to avoid discrepancies in your balance sheet accounts later. Once an asset is recognized, it begins its journey of devaluing through depreciation, which is a systematic allocation of the acquisition cost over the asset's utility period. To manage this in Dynamics 365, you must configure a depreciation profile that dictates how the system distributes these costs over time. A common choice is the straight-line method, where the asset loses an equal amount of value in every period, which is straightforward and predictable for stable assets. Conversely, you might opt for a reducing balance method if your asset undergoes more heavy usage in its earlier years, leading to higher devaluations at the start of its lifespan. These profiles are assigned to depreciation books, which act as the engines for your calculations and determine how value adjustments are applied to the ledger. You do not manually calculate these figures daily. Instead, you rely on the depreciation proposal engine, which automates the collection of eligible assets and calculates the required entries based on your active profiles. Executing the depreciation process involves running the proposal engine, reviewing the generated entries for accuracy, and then posting them to the general ledger. This periodic activity ensures that your financial statements reflect the current net book value, which is effectively the acquisition cost minus the accumulated depreciation to date. If circumstances change, such as a major overhaul that extends an asset's life or a sudden loss in value due to market shifts, you may need to process value adjustments to reflect these realities accurately. These adjustments create an additional ledger entry that directly impacts the net book value without necessarily altering the depreciation profile itself. Effectively managing these flows is crucial for compliance and audit readiness, as they represent how you communicate the ongoing economic reality of your company's physical holdings. As you track these values over time, remember that the reliability of your reporting depends entirely on the precision of the initial setup and the consistency of your recurring periodic processes. I will see you in our next session. Welcome back. In this session, we will examine the accounting requirements and system mechanics for processing fixed asset disposals within Dynamics 365 Finance. When an organization decides to retire an asset, the system requires a structured process to ensure the general ledger accurately reflects the removal of that asset from the balance sheet. This process typically manifests in one of two ways: selling the asset to an external party or scrapping it when it no longer holds residual or market value. Before any transaction occurs, you must configure the disposal parameters within the Fixed Assets module. These parameters dictate which ledger accounts are impacted by the disposal and ensure that the posting profiles align with your organization's depreciation and acquisition logic. Understanding these mechanics is essential for maintaining audit integrity and ensures that the financial statements represent the current state of your property, plant, and equipment. The mechanics of an asset disposal journal serve as the primary vehicle for recording these events. When you initiate a disposal, the system examines the historical acquisition cost of the asset and the accumulated depreciation records associated with it. Dynamics 365 Finance handles the calculation of the net book value automatically, comparing it against the proceeds received in a sale or recognizing a full loss in a scrapping scenario. For a sale, the process often involves posting a free text invoice, which links the disposal transaction to a customer account and allows for the recognition of revenue or loss on the disposal. The system then automatically reverses the initial asset values, removing the cost from the books while simultaneously recording the realized impact in the general ledger. Consider an asset that originally cost $10,000 and has accumulated depreciation of $8,000, resulting in a net book value of $2,000. If you sell this asset for $3,000, the system must trigger a sequence of accounting entries to record both the removal of the asset and the gain on the sale. The credit to the asset account and the debit to the accumulated depreciation account are balanced against the cash received and the gain account. If you were to scrap the same asset, the system would simply record a total loss of $2,000, as there are no proceeds to offset the remaining book value. This automated calculation is a powerful feature of the platform, as it eliminates the need for manual ledger entries that would otherwise be prone to human calculation errors during the end-of-period closing process. To ensure these disposals are reflected correctly, you must verify that the disposal parameters in the fixed assets posting profiles are correctly mapped to your chart of accounts. If the posting profile is incorrectly configured, the depreciation adjustment or the gain/loss calculation may inadvertently post to the wrong financial dimensions. Many users find it helpful to perform a test disposal in a sandbox environment to visualize how the system segregates these transactions before applying them to production data. The system allows for parameter adjustments, such as including or excluding the asset from the fixed asset register, which impacts whether the asset remains visible in future reporting. By properly sequencing these steps, configuring the parameters, creating the disposal journal, and verifying the invoice posting, you gain total control over the asset lifecycle transition. Once the disposal posting is finalized, the asset status is updated to reflect that the lifecycle has reached its end. The general ledger updates immediately, meaning that financial reports generated for the current period will show the asset as removed, while historical data remains intact for auditing. This transition ensures that your balance sheet is never overstated by assets that have long since been disposed of or sold. The precision of these system mechanics is what auditors typically look for when evaluating fixed asset controls, as the trail from acquisition cost to final disposal should be transparent and consistent. As you continue to work with fixed assets, remember that the accuracy of the disposal depends almost entirely on the quality of the initial configuration and the consistent application of your organization's capitalization policies. See you in the next lecture. Hello, welcome to this session on the core concepts of the budgeting framework within Dynamics 365 Finance. We will examine how to construct the structural models that underpin financial planning and organizational expenditure control. In Dynamics 365 Finance, effective budgeting begins with the definition of budget models. You can think of a budget model as a container for your budgetary data, which allows you to categorize and distinguish between different organizational plans, such as an original budget, a revised forecast, or a specific department-level simulation. By assigning a unique model, you ensure that financial data remains segregated and reportable according to specific fiscal requirements. Setting up these models correctly is mandatory because every subsequent entry in the budget planning module must reference a model to maintain data integrity. This logical separation is what allows enterprise-level organizations to run parallel planning scenarios without interference between datasets. When you define these models, you are effectively setting the top-level parameters for all future financial activities within the budgeting module. Once you have defined your models, you must turn your attention to budget codes, which serve as the mechanism for classifying transactions. A budget code acts as a label, telling the system whether a specific entry represents an initial allocation, a transfer, a revision, or a carry-forward amount. By configuring clear and meaningful budget codes, you enable better transparency for auditors and financial controllers who need to reconcile the ledger against the planned spending. These codes are often linked to specific budget workflows, ensuring that an adjustment request undergoes the appropriate level of scrutiny before it is officially committed to the records. The system utilizes these codes to determine how specific adjustments affect the overall available budget, making them vital for maintaining control over your financial resources. The precision of your reporting relies heavily on the establishment of budget dimensions, which allow you to slice your financial data into meaningful segments. In Dynamics 365 Finance, you map these budget dimensions directly to your existing financial dimensions, meaning your budgets are inherently integrated with your chart of accounts. If your corporate reporting structure requires analysis by department, cost center, or project, you must ensure that these dimensions are enabled for budgeting purposes. Without granular dimension configuration, you would find it nearly impossible to perform effective variance analysis across distinct fiscal periods. By aligning your budget structure with your financial dimensions, you create a seamless flow of data that translates abstract financial plans into actionable, tracked realities within the system. Designing budget plan templates is the next logical step in structuring your organizational approach to financial management. These templates function as the user interface for inputting budgetary data, allowing you to control which financial columns and rows are visible to the departments filling them out. Whether your organization prefers a top-down approach, where executive leadership dictates the figures, or a bottom-up model, where individual departments propose their own requirements, the template design facilitates this workflow. You can incorporate default allocation rules within these templates to automate how totals are distributed across various periods or dimensions. This automation significantly reduces manual data entry errors and ensures that the organization adheres to predefined allocation policies throughout the budget preparation cycle. Workflows tie these components together by orchestrating the movement of budget plans from initial drafting to final approval. When you establish a budget planning workflow, you define the sequence of review stages and the required sign-offs needed for any entry to transition from a draft state to a finalized or budget register state. This structural control ensures that no unapproved or non-compliant budget figure can distort the organization's financial outlook. By automating this, you reduce the administrative overhead compared to manual or spreadsheet-based processes, ensuring that the budget remains a living, controlled document. Once the workflow is active, the system assumes responsibility for enforcing these rules, allowing stakeholders to focus on the numbers rather than the mechanics of the approval process. Understanding the integration between these foundational elements is crucial for anyone responsible for performing variance analysis. You are essentially building a system where every transaction is tracked against a set of dimensions that mirror your actual expenditures. If you do not configure the budget models, codes, and dimensions correctly from the start, the system cannot perform the gap analysis needed to flag overspending or underutilization. This alignment allows users to see, at any given time, the difference between the planned financial state and the current execution state within the general ledger. Mastering this structural foundation is the prerequisite for moving on to more complex topics like budget register entries or real-time budget controls. See you in the next lecture. Welcome to the budgeting chapter, where we will demystify the transactional mechanics behind financial planning in Dynamics 365 Finance. We are going to master the budget register entries to ensure your organization maintains rigorous control over its fiscal health. In Dynamics 365 Finance, budget register entries act as the primary mechanism for managing financial plans. When you need to establish an initial budget balance, you create a budget register entry with a specific budget code designated for original budgets. This process is not merely a static input. It captures the intended financial roadmap for a legal entity. By assigning these values to financial dimensions, you translate high-level planning into actionable figures that the system can track against actual spending. The accuracy of these initial entries is paramount because they serve as the foundational baseline for all subsequent variances and reporting. You will find that these entries are structured around budget models and codes, which help delineate the purpose of the data within the system. Moving beyond the initial setup, organizations frequently require budget transfers to move funds between accounts or departments. A budget transfer is an adjustment that maintains the net zero impact on the overall budget, ensuring that specific line items are correctly funded based on shifting organizational priorities. When you record these transfers, the system updates the budget register entry lines to reflect the debit and credit adjustments across your ledger accounts. This functionality is essential for maintaining agility in a dynamic business environment where forecasted needs rarely remain static over time. Because these adjustments are recorded through the same registers, the system maintains a unified ledger of all movements. This approach allows a controller to verify that fund reallocation is performed within established policy constraints. Budget revisions represent another critical component that organizations utilize when they must modify total budget amounts based on external or internal factors. Unlike a simple transfer, a revision typically results in an increase or decrease to the total available budget balance for a specific period. These updates are recorded within budget register entries and often trigger complex workflows for managerial review and approval. The system requires that these modifications be mapped to specific budget codes that distinguish a revision from an original allocation. By maintaining this distinction, the organization preserves a clear history of why funding levels were altered. This structured input process prevents ad hoc changes and ensures that all financial plan amendments follow a standardized validation path. Managing budget updates across multiple periods is handled through the temporal settings of the budget register entry. Each line within an entry contains date information that allows the system to aggregate or disaggregate budget data according to your fiscal calendar. This temporal control ensures that you do not inadvertently impact multiple future periods when only a single quarter requires adjustment. Additionally, Dynamics 365 supports the integration of these entries through Excel data entities, which significantly reduces the manual entry burden. You can export a draft, manipulate the figures in a spreadsheet, and import them back into the finance module, where the system validates the data against existing constraints. This workflow efficiency is a standard expectation in modern finance teams and minimizes the risk of human error during large-scale updates. Approval workflows play a fundamental role in the lifecycle of a budget register entry by enforcing authorization hierarchies. When a user submits an entry, the workflow engine evaluates the document based on predefined business rules. If the entry meets the criteria, it transitions through statuses such as draft, in review, and eventually approved, or even denied. This mechanism is not just a digital signature. It is a gatekeeping function that ensures no significant budget modification reaches the general ledger without appropriate oversight. Furthermore, the system builds an immutable audit trail for every change, tracking who initiated the entry, who approved it, and when the modification was executed. These logs are indispensable for compliance audits, as they provide a clear narrative of the organizational decision-making process. I will see you in the next lecture. Welcome back. Today, we examine the mechanics of enforcing financial discipline through the implementation of budget controls within Dynamics 365. Budget control in Dynamics 365 Finance acts as a proactive governing mechanism rather than a retrospective reporting tool. It is designed to evaluate financial availability at the point of origin, meaning that before a purchase requisition is approved or a general journal is posted, the system checks the transaction against the predefined budget. This real-time validation ensures that organizations do not inadvertently exceed their spending authority. You should perceive this as an automated gatekeeper that operates across the procurement and journal entry workflows. By defining specific budget control rules, you determine how the system calculates available funds and how it should react when a transaction threatens to push an account into a deficit. The core objective is to shift the fiscal responsibility from individual departments to the platform itself, thus providing a consistent layer of oversight across the entire enterprise. When configuring these controls, the first step involves selecting the relevant financial dimensions and main accounts that will be subject to oversight. Financial dimensions serve as the building blocks for cost centers, departments, or projects, effectively allowing you to ring-fence specific buckets of money. You are not required to exert control over every single ledger account. Instead, you focus on those where spending discipline is critical to organizational health. Once you define the scope of your control, the system requires input on the budget cycle timespan and the specific funds available calculation. This calculation determines what truly counts as available, factoring in not just the working budget, but also existing encumbrances and pre-encumbrances. Encumbrances essentially reserve funds for pending purchase orders, effectively adjusting the remaining balance before an actual invoice ever touches your books. The behavior of the system when a limit is exceeded is determined by your configuration of threshold checks and enforcement levels. You have the flexibility to implement a multi-level strategy that differentiates between cautionary warnings and hard stop preventions. For instance, you might choose to allow a user to proceed with a purchase requisition even if it slightly exceeds the monthly budget, provided the system issues an explicit notification through the user interface. Conversely, for large expenditures or critical accounts, you may enforce a hard block that prevents the document from transitioning to the next workflow stage until additional budget is allocated or funds are reallocated. This dual-layered approach balances the need for administrative control with the practical requirements of timely operational execution. These rules are applied consistently to purchase requisitions, purchase orders, and even general journals, ensuring that no matter the source of the expense, the fiscal constraints remain enforced. Ultimately, the effectiveness of your budget control implementation relies on how accurately the budget register entries reflect your organization's actual financial strategy. While the system evaluates the financial dimensions you have configured, remember that data integrity is paramount. If your chart of accounts is overly fragmented, the complexity of managing budget thresholds increases significantly without necessarily providing better visibility. Aim for a structure that aligns with the reporting requirements of your finance departments while remaining manageable for those responsible for procurement. By creating a robust mapping between the general ledger setup and your budget control rules, you provide the tools necessary for the platform to stop unauthorized overexpenditure before the organization is legally or financially bound by a contract. Precision here is the difference between an agile, well-managed financial environment and one burdened by constant reconciliations and budget adjustments to cover unapproved spending. See you in the next lecture. Welcome to the exploration of inventory management within Dynamics 365 Supply Chain Management. We will focus on the fundamental structures that govern how items are tracked and valued within the system. Successful inventory control in Dynamics 365 starts with a precise understanding of the three primary dimension types that define any product. Tracking dimensions determine how you monitor items, such as by serial number or batch number, which is essential for traceability and quality control. Storage dimensions define the physical topology of your inventory, including the site, warehouse, and specific location where goods reside. Product dimensions are reserved for items that share common properties but vary by size, color, or configuration, providing a clean way to manage complex catalogs without creating unnecessary individual product records. These dimensions act as the foundational metadata for every inventory transaction, dictating how the system groups and stores data. When you configure these dimensions, You are essentially setting the rules of engagement for the entire supply chain. Without a coherent dimension structure, the system cannot accurately aggregate inventory levels or perform precise stock movements. It is therefore vital to define these parameters before finalizing your item setup to avoid significant reconciliation issues later. Relying on default dimensions simplifies daily operations, though you should always ensure that your choice of dimensions aligns with your specific industry requirements. Inventory journals serve as the primary mechanism for adjusting on-hand quantities manually or through system-driven events. These journals handle diverse scenarios, including inventory receipts, issues, stock transfers, and periodic counting cycles. When you post an inventory journal, the system triggers a series of events. It updates the physical quantity and simultaneously calculates the financial impact based on the active inventory valuation model. This integration ensures that the physical warehouse operations remain tightly coupled with the back-end general ledger. From a ledger perspective, the financial posting profile attached to the inventory transaction dictates which accounts receive the debit or credit entries. If you are performing a simple adjustment for damaged stock, the posting profile routes the value to a specific inventory shrinkage account in the general ledger. This automatic reconciliation between the inventory subledger and the general ledger is a hallmark of the Dynamics 365 architecture. By utilizing these journals, you maintain a continuous audit trail that captures the who, what, when, and where of every inventory movement. Inventory transactions represent the life cycle states of an item, transitioning from ordered to reserved, and finally to deducted or sold. Managing these states effectively prevents overselling and ensures that stock is allocated to the most critical business requirements through robust reservation logic. When a sales order is created, the system can automatically reserve stock, effectively locking that quantity so it remains unavailable for other demands. The influence on the financial ledger is profound because, depending on your configuration, these transactions may trigger accounting entries even before the physical item leaves the warehouse. For example, if you use standard costing or weighted average costing, the system uses these transactions to derive the unit cost that eventually populates the financial statements. This granular level of tracking allows you to move beyond simple quantity monitoring into sophisticated value management. You are essentially building a bridge between the chaotic reality of physical loading docks and the sterile, structured world of financial reporting. Maintaining integrity in these transactions guarantees that your balance sheet reflects the true value of your physical assets at any given point in time. See you in our upcoming session. Welcome back. In this lesson, we will focus on the architectural foundations of inventory management by examining how Microsoft Dynamics 365 supply chain management organizes physical locations through the hierarchy of sites and warehouses. To understand organizational structures in Dynamics 365, we must first distinguish between the logical and physical layers of your supply chain. A site represents the highest level in the inventory location hierarchy, typically mapping to a geographical region, a specific city, or a manufacturing campus. It serves as a boundary for various planning and operational parameters, meaning that all warehouses associated with a specific site must belong to the same time zone and follow the same financial dimension set. By grouping multiple facilities under a single site, you establish a common domain for master planning, which simplifies the way the system calculates replenishment requirements across diverse physical buildings. This geographical grouping ensures that the supply chain engine considers the proximity of inventory when deciding where to allocate stock or initiate interfacility transfers. When you configure a site, you are essentially setting the stage for how the system handles site-specific inventory valuation and reporting. Without a properly defined site, the integration between your procurement processes and the general ledger would lack the necessary regional context to function accurately. Below the site level, we find the warehouse, which acts as the primary entity for tracking physical stocks within your operational facilities. While a site is a broad geographical container, a warehouse is the tangible space where items are received, stored, and picked for shipment. You can further refine these spaces using internal location tracking components such as aisles, racks, shelves, and bins, providing the granularity necessary for effective warehouse management system operations. When you define a warehouse, you link it to a specific site, creating an inheritance chain where the warehouse adopts the site's financial and planning attributes. This relationship is critical because it ensures that inventory movements, whether they are transfers between two warehouses in the same region or long-distance shipments, trigger the correct accounting transactions. If you do not maintain a clear mapping of these facilities, the system will struggle to calculate available to promise quantities or execute accurate material requirements planning across your logistics network. Precision at this level prevents inventory shrinkage, improves picking efficiency, and provides the visibility required for accurate stock level reporting. The parameters governing these structures extend their influence deep into the financial heart of the organization through the use of default financial dimensions. Each warehouse can be configured to automatically populate specific financial segments on purchase orders, sales orders, and inventory journals. By assigning dimensions like cost centers or departments to a warehouse, you ensure that every transaction involving that stock is automatically tagged for accurate financial reporting. Consider a manufacturing firm with multiple warehouses. If each warehouse is assigned a unique cost center dimension, the finance team can immediately see which facility is consuming the most resources or generating the highest overhead costs. This configuration reduces the manual overhead of data entry for warehouse personnel while simultaneously maintaining the integrity of the ledger. These settings are not merely for show. The master planning engine reads these parameters to decide which facility is best positioned to fulfill a customer order based on lead times and stock availability defined at the warehouse level. By streamlining these cross-facility stock movements, you effectively harmonize your physical logistics with the firm's overall financial objectives. Understanding how these hierarchies interact is essential for anyone aiming to pass the Finance Fundamentals exam. You must recognize that the physical structure of your warehouse system directly dictates the precision of your inventory valuation and the effectiveness of your replenishment strategies. When configurations are consistent across sites and well mapped within the application, the resulting data provides a transparent view of the enterprise's assets. This visibility is exactly what stakeholders need to make informed decisions about inventory placement and supply chain sustainability. Mastering these fundamental concepts ensures that you can guide the implementation of Dynamics 365 in a way that remains scalable and audit-ready as the business grows. By correctly structuring your sites and warehouses, you create a robust data backbone that supports every procurement, sales, and internal transfer process within the application. Remember that the system's ability to automate core replenishment depends entirely on the logical accuracy of the geography you have defined. I will see you in the next lesson. Welcome to the Product Information Management chapter. We will explore how the system maintains product integrity through master data records and governance structures. In Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain Management, the concept of a product is central to every transaction. You start by defining a product master, which acts as the template for all versions of a specific item across the enterprise. Once a product master exists, you proceed to release this item to specific legal entities. This release process is essential because it anchors the product to a specific business unit, allowing you to define distinct cost attributes, pricing models, and default warehouse parameters for that entity. By decoupling the master definition from the entity-specific attributes, the system ensures that while a product shares a common identity globally, its operational behavior remains contextually relevant to the subsidiary or branch selling or manufacturing it. Effective governance requires standardized item groups, which act as the bridge between inventory operations and the general ledger. When you associate an item with an item group, you are essentially defining the accounting behavior for that item across procurement, inventory movement, and sales. For example, if you categorize a product within a specific group, the system automatically routes financial postings to predefined accounts based on the transactions performed in the supply chain module. This automation prevents manual entry errors and guarantees that the cost of goods sold, inventory value, and purchase price variances are consistently tracked according to organizational accounting standards. Without these groups, achieving accurate financial oversight across thousands of individual inventory items would be an impossible task. Tracking dimensions provide the granular visibility necessary for complex enterprise environments. When configuring a product, you must decide how the system should track that item at a physical level. Serial numbers allow for the precise identification of individual units, which is standard practice in industries like electronics or heavy machinery, where warranty and repair history are paramount. Batch numbers, conversely, are indispensable for industries such as pharmaceuticals or food manufacturing, where shelf life and regulatory compliance necessitate the ability to trace products back to their origin. By defining these dimensions at the setup phase, you prevent data integrity issues that arise when attempting to retrofit tracking requirements onto products that are already being processed through live procurement and sales channels. Unit of measure conversions are the final critical piece of this structural puzzle. It is common for an enterprise to purchase materials in bulk, such as pallets or tons, while selling them in individual units or dozens. Dynamics 365 provides a robust framework to implement global conversions, ensuring that the system automatically handles these mathematical challenges during inventory transactions. When a warehouse employee converts inventory from a pallet to an individual piece, the system performs the necessary calculation based on the established conversion rates. This ensures that the inventory ledger remains in balance regardless of the unit of measure used in the transaction. This level of automation is what ultimately allows for reliable demand planning and procurement forecasting across the supply chain. See you in the next lesson. Hello, and welcome to this final session where we will consolidate everything you have learned to ensure you are ready for the MB-920 certification exam. We're going to review the core pillars of Dynamics 365 Finance to sharpen your grasp on the exam's most tested domains. To succeed in this exam, one must move beyond rote memorization and understand the underlying architecture of the platform. Think of the general ledger not merely as a feature, but as the backbone that connects procurement to cash management through financial dimensions. When we analyze the procure-to-pay cycle, the system is fundamentally tracking the transformation of a purchase order into a vendor liability, which eventually informs our cash flow requirements. Recognizing that the order-to-cash cycle mirrors this process in reverse helps you identify the dependencies between sales orders, invoicing, and the subsequent reconciliation in your bank modules. If you can trace the flow of a single transaction from its source document through to the ledger posting, you have already mastered the most complex logic the exam asks of you. Asset management and budgeting are often where candidates lose marks due to the subtle differences in lifecycle states. Remember that asset acquisition involves a transition from a purchase order or a journal process into the fixed asset ledger, where depreciation methods dictate the consumption of value over time. Similarly, budgeting is not just about setting limits. It involves the integration of budget registers and control constraints that act as guardrails for your operational spending. When a question provides a scenario involving an over-budget status, look for the distinction between a soft warning and a hard stop configuration. These settings are deeply tied to the foundational dimensions we discussed in the earlier modules, and they demonstrate how the platform enforces fiscal discipline across various departments. Data reporting and embedded analytics represent the layer where raw data becomes actionable intelligence within the Dynamics ecosystem. You should be prepared to differentiate between standard SSRS reports, which are meant for predefined document formats like invoices, and Power BI dashboards, which are better suited for trend analysis. The exam will frequently test your ability to use the global search and workspaces to find information. So keep in mind that these tools are designed to surface relevant, role-specific data. If you are asked about integration, recall that the system relies on standardized data frameworks to ensure that financial information remains consistent, whether it originates from a retail channel or a supply chain module. Keeping the integrity of the data across these shared platforms is paramount for passing those specific systems administration questions. As you approach the actual test, time management is your most critical soft skill beyond the technical knowledge itself. Because the exam includes a variety of question types, including drag and drop and scenario-based problems, you should allocate your time based on the complexity of the domain rather than just the number of questions. During the proctored exam, reading the prompt requirements carefully is essential because many scenarios contain extra information meant to test your ability to filter for relevant details. If you follow the official guidance for registration via the Microsoft Learning Portal, ensure your profile details match your identification documents exactly. Success here is as much about your preparation in the final hours as it is about your theoretical understanding of the finance application. I look forward to hearing about your success on the certification exam.